Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I am happy that you could join me. I was running a bit late this morning. I was looking for something that, for the life of me, I could not find. Usually, Twitter is my spot to organize things for the show in my life. And so, when I'm looking at various segments and everything else, Twitter is kind of like my placeholder for it. And I could have swore, and maybe I am just losing my mind. Um, I could have swore that there was a comment that Donald Trump made that I, for the life of me, at this moment, cannot find. And I've been looking at it all morning, and it effectively pushed me further into the rears. But I'm glad you guys can join me. I hope you guys are doing well. Shout out to my chat method. Back at you. Morning to you. Also, Holly Holmes. Shout out to you, Holly. I cannot see what this one is because the color is too dark. Lucy Woodruff, I think. And there's another one, Dr. Nick. Shout out to all of you. Thank you for joining me. We have a fantastic, loaded show for you today. Um, One of the things that I do have access to is the mineral deal that Zelensky effectively signed on to. Now, as I pointed out yesterday, I was not, there's a question to me about whether or not, how much value is in it. Because these are things that are going to have to be harvested. It's expensive to harvest minerals, rare earth minerals. There's also this question of whether or not they would fulfill the obligations of the contract, whatever they signed. I mean, keep in mind, this is Ukraine. They did not fulfill the Minsk agreements. They blew off the Istanbul agreements. What is the thinking around this? This goes beyond rare earth minerals. It goes beyond rare earth minerals. Right here. And when I use the term, oh, my guest is here. All right, I'll come back to this. Because this is fascinating. They're talking about giving up 50% of all revenues earned from future monetization of all relevant Ukrainian government-owned natural resources assets, whether owned directly or indirectly by the Ukrainian government, defined as deposits of minerals, hydrocarbons, oil, natural gas, and other extractable minerals and other infrastructure relevant to natural resources and assets. That's astonishing. Just that part that I read right there. There are no security guarantees attached to this. When I say Zelensky got raped, Zelensky got raped. My man, Dr. Wilmer Leon, how you doing this morning? You doing okay?
I'm doing better than Volodymyr Zelensky, but I disagree with you saying that he got raped, because you cannot rape a willing participant.
Right.
You
I'm sorry, Wilmer.
cannot
Give me 1 second.
you
Let me
cannot
fix
act
this.
like a hoe and complain when you get screwed.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that's part of that's in the job description.
It is extensive. Like, I
No,
mean, like any and everything that they got coming out of the ground, 50% of it, the US is talking about owning it. And in the very beginning, the entire point of the mineral deal that was put up, if you remember, Lindsey Graham was having a conversation, and Lindsey Graham was telling Trump, hey, they got all these minerals. We can get all this stuff, from Ukraine.
Mhm.
And Zelensky apparently floated, hey, they're minerals, rare earth minerals. You can get those. Rare earth minerals is not oil. It's not all of this other stuff that they're
Right.
talking about. And Zelensky did that because the thought was, okay, well, I will offer this for NATO membership, or I would offer this for security guarantees, meaning I could get the US more ensconced in it. He gets no security guarantees from this. And I don't get the sense that Donald Trump is even open to giving in those security guarantees. He is trying to end this. And so it's like, you have effectively given up 50% of all of this stuff that's in your ground and coming out of the ground. We don't know the exact value. I remember Bloomberg pointed out that Zelensky was effectively lying about the actual value, but that's secondary to the point. You are coming here on Friday, ideally, to sign a contract where you don't get the security guarantees that you wanted, and you're giving up 50% of the future of whatever is left of Ukraine. like you said, willing hoe, a willing hoe. How you
Can't
doing, man?
complain.
And just for the
I'm
audience,
getting pimped.
Dr. Wimmerleon is a political scientist, nationally syndicated columnist, host of his own show on YouTube. Check him out, Connecting the Dots. I want to do you proper when you're coming in. Yeah, just wild. I was just the deal came out today, like the text of it, and it's just reading is like, oh, so you just screwed over your country.
Well, and there's another point that I think is important to part of this analysis, and that is on the rare earth minerals. Yes, they know that rare earth minerals exist in Ukraine, but to a great degree, they don't know to what extent.
Amount. That's right.
And I was reading where a mine of the nature that they need can take up to 15 years to
Yes.
develop.
Yep.
So all of this bluster by the Trump administration about it could at this stage of the game, it's all sizzle and no steak because you don't know what you have.
Right.
So and then this is also, from what I've read, more of a private sector, possibly a private sector benefit because of the amount of investment that it takes
Right.
to develop a mine of this nature. They're talking, I think, $1 billion.
Yeah.
To develop a mine to extract these. So there's put it this way, there's a lot more uncertainty than there is certainty. And Donald Trump is running around promoting success when you really don't know what you have.
No, that's true. That's very true. The only catch with that, though, is it goes beyond the rare earths. Like, because
I was just limiting that to the rare earths. That's all.
Yeah, because we don't know. You're 1,000% right. It takes a huge amount of money. It's a massive amount of mining in order to get those things. But I mean, if Zelensky would have left it at that, fair enough. And he could have said, well, look, man, we have no idea what these rare earths are. We signed a contract. So what? But then when you add in oil, gas, natural gas, extractable materials, what the hell does that even mean, extractable materials? Like, just basically anything that is coming out of the ground, we own 50% of it. That is amazing.
And here's another question, which I'm going to be talking to Professor Nikolai Petro on my Connecting the Dots show today.
Yeah.
Shameless.
What time?
3 to 4 Eastern.
Okay.
3 to 4 Eastern. Professor Nikolai Petro. And because I don't know that actually Zelensky has the authority to sign the deal.
Yeah.
Because I've read a couple of places that we do know his term expired.
Right.
But from what I've read, according to the Ukrainian constitution, even in a time of martial law, the power of the president reverts to the Rada. It reverts to their parliament, not to the president, which I think is one of the points that validates President Putin's point about, I can't talk to you because you don't have any power.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was getting coffee. No, you're right. This is Putin's argument, right? I can't sign a peace deal with you because you don't have the legitimate thing. Right. And in 2 years, 3 years, you can come back. Well, that guy wasn't legitimate, so we don't have to pay attention to this deal.
So when you listen to the mainstream analysis, they say, yes, Zelensky's term has ended, but because it's martial law, he's still the president.
Yeah, that's nonsense.
But what I hear is, no, unlike here, in a time of martial law, once the president's term expires, the president is done and the power reverts to the Rada. So I'm going to ask Petro that question because he'll know the answer to that question.
Oh, that would be a great question. That is a great question. it's just fascinating. I
Mhm.
can't imagine being a Ukrainian that was in the country when the government was overthrown, that voted for Zelensky because let's say you're in Western Ukraine, you didn't want a war, you voted for Zelensky, and then he turns into a war maniac.
Right.
You get the overwhelming majority of the country saying we want the war to stop, even if it's um, land concessions associated
Mhm.
with it. And then on top of all of that, you lose 20% of your land, you lose 600,000 of your people. And then you get the US president that led you down this primrose path, meaning the country, turn around and say, by the way, now we need 50% of your stuff that's left. That, like, that is such a mind blowing thing. Um, but Dr.
Wait a
Leon,
minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. I want 50% of your stuff to repay me for engaging in a fight that I started in your country.
yes,
And when I speak in the context of I'm talking about the United States,
right,
not the particular president in the Oval Office. But we do know that that Trump sent weapons into Ukraine after President Obama said this is not a good idea. This is not going to work out well for us.
right,
Obama said no. Trump sent weapons in, and then Biden doubles down on the Trump foolishness. So I start the fight in your country, and now I want 50% of your stuff to reimburse me for the fight I started.
right. And by the way, the reason why we're saying the fight that we started is because we offered NATO membership back in 2008 in the Bucharest summit. You had William Burns writing the memo, net means net, effectively saying, dude, we are going to provoke a civil war. Russia does not want to get involved in, but it will because it's on their border, meaning they don't have a choice. They have to engage. And so we're pushing this entire time, knowing that this is a red line, and we continue to push, we continue to push, we continue to push. Then you get Hillary Clinton under Obama overthrowing the Ukrainian government, basically taking Yanukovych out. So it wasn't, it's like people can start at, well, the Russians invaded, but we have been pressing and pressing and pressing on what we knew was a red line, red button issue. And we just so happened to have a gang of stupid idiot Nazis that was willing to take a country into this, meaning to acquiesce to what the US ultimately wanted. Yeah,
but wait a minute, you can go back. See this too I was in a meeting on today is Thursday. I was in a meeting on Tuesday, and this issue came up, and one of the people in the meeting said, "Well, well, of course, Russia started the war.
Yeah.
Russia invaded Ukraine, and I even take issue with the word invaded. And this is I know the definition of the word, and I know that Russia went in first, but they were provoked, and so in my opinion, I always think of invading as an act of aggression,
right,
not as an act of defense. And I know that is not the strict Webster definition of the term, but for me, for the sake of this conversation about this event, it is, if you use the word invade, it tends to create the mindset or the misperception that Russia did this for no reason.
Right. It has a connotation.
And we have to go back to 1990, and we have to go back to the conversation between the Soviet Gorbachev and James Baker, when James Baker promised Gorbachev, if you agree to the reunification of Germany, NATO will not move any further, not 1 inch closer towards the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
That to me is where this analysis always has to start, because that's where the conflict started.
Yeah.
It's like an infection. You can cut yourself and rub it and get an infection and then it may take months for gangrene to set in and you lose your appendage. Well, you didn't lose the appendage because of the gangrene. You lost your appendage because of the unattended first cut that allowed the infection to invade the body in the first place.
Yeah, totally agree. Give me your. This wasn't supposed to be the conversation, but give me your take on Gorbachev. I am. It is shocking to me the disparity between, let's say, the Russian point of view of Gorbachev versus the American point of view. I share the American point of view. Which is he's a great man. He was a diplomat. He was willing to make peace. He was willing to reach across the aisle. He took great, gargantuan political risk doing what he did. That risk did not pay off, but he was willing to take that risk. And there's something about this notion of you need hopeful people, like meaning you need people who are willing to say, okay, I know the political realities as they are now, but I think we can push the political realities into a different space. I think we can be different. I think we can do different. That is not the Russian point of view of Gorbachev. They think he's a stupid idiot. They think he's a useful idiot. They think he sold out the country for these kind of hopeful promises of America. Like there's like working at the station. And I remember, I think I was talking to Andre one day and Andre was like, screw that guy. I think he's a F that guy. It was something like that. It was more brutal than that. Give me your take on him. Because my take could be totally wrong. I could be looking through rose-colored glasses in the way that I'm looking at him, and
and I've actually seen you wear rose-colored glasses.
I have those. Yeah,
I do have them. Yeah. I know. That's why I said that. Well, first, let me two things. One, this is not my area of expertise.
Neither is mine.
So I need to preface and I won't even call it analysis because it's not my area of expertise. The second point is, who am I to question Andre about his analysis of his country when I've only been there once and didn't make it past the airport? So if Andre takes that position, who am I to tell Andre is wrong? Who am I to tell Andre that he's wrong? Mm-hmm. With that being said, I don't think you can give a proper analysis of Gorbachev without understanding Yeltsin.
Yes.
Because I think Yeltsin preceded Gorbachev. And I saw Yeltsin as pretty much a drunken boob that acquiesced to the pressures of the West, agreeing to open the Russian economy and Russian banking to be raped and pillaged by Western financial interests.
Yeah.
Now, again, that's my opinion, and it is not as well of an informed opinion as others. So if I'm wrong, Andre, I apologize. Please call me and educate me. Mindia, if I'm wrong, I apologize. So I see Gorbachev as trying to balance a position that Yeltsin to a great degree put him in, and tried to, in some regards, put the genie back in the bottle, at the same time realizing that an isolationist mindset was not going to work in that current circumstance. Mm-hmm. And this is a question, this is not rhetorical because I don't know the answer. Could Russia have achieved what it has achieved under Putin without Gorbachev laying the foundations that he did? I don't know the answer to that question. And Andre may call me or appear on my doorstep and tell me I'm wrong. And I'd have to, okay, explain to me why. And I have to, because I don't know, but from my very, very limited understanding, um, I, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it is a reasonable question to ask. And with that being said, I would agree with your assessment.
Yeah, yeah, I was fascinated by it. I just was. There's this great book that goes. I think it takes like a year out of the life up to the point of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and it shows this kind of play between Yeltsin and Gorbachev, and how there was this like radical shift of power distribution as it dissolved and it became Russia as opposed to the Soviet Union, and how Gorbachev was like just losing grip all the way through, with Yeltsin getting stronger and stronger as he was using grip. And part of the reason he was losing grip is because he was trying to federalize the system. Like, he was trying to change the system, and in the process of changing it, he was losing control. Oh, it's a fascinating book. There is a place for dreamers in this world, and I hate this idea. That's me being Star Trek. That's all. I just.
But so let me ask you this: is it a matter of being a dreamer, or is it a matter of vision, forward thinking, and realizing the potential realities that are there and making the necessary adjustments to keep pace with the change?
Reality has a way of confronting you with difficult situations. And in being confronted with those difficult situations, it is very easy to get cynical when your reality is continuously presenting you with the fact that your cynicism is correct. I think there's a reason that it takes religious leaders. Like, if you're talking about like a Martin Luther King, a Malcolm X, both of these were in a religious context, even though they were trying to get political changes. It's because it is very difficult to see your way out of a box. It's like, it seems like nothing ever changes. It's like, it fixed. And so it almost requires like this kind of secondary vision of being able to see beyond what reality is currently presenting you with constantly. It's like James Baldwin has this line. He was like, I think, what he said, having a hole in your sock makes you feel like, crappy because you're holding your sock. It was something to that effect. It was some, I'm paraphrasing. It's that. And so it's a difficult thing. Like, and even in the Gorbachev example that we're talking about, he failed. Like, he had vision. He saw what he needed to do. He saw what he wanted to do, what was going to be in the best interest. And he failed. And Russia collapsed. I mean, the Soviet Union collapsed. And the US raped Russia blind during the Yeltsin years. So it's like, even in that situation, like, your cynicism would have been proven correct. And so it's like, if that's true, where your cynicism is often proven correct, and even in the situation that we're positing of, hey, great man, vision, all that stuff, and yet failed at it, that is a difficult thing.
Well, two things. One, you talked about Dr. King and Malcolm in the religious or the spiritual context. I would, and this is not a pushback. This is just
please push back.
No. This is just a semantics issue. I base it in morality, especially. Well, but Baldwin was also had come up as a child prodigy, as a minister. And so even though I don't know if he was ever ordained, but I know that he in his early years wanted to be a minister. So he was always spiritually / morally based in his analysis. And so it's that basis in morality that's how I would reference it, as opposed to a religious base. As Dr. King told us, the moral arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. So that's the only point that I would make there. And I also, and again, this is a question I don't know the answer to. When you say that Gorbachev failed, is it a matter of within what time frame or context are you speaking? Because he failed in the immediate application of his vision.
Right.
But again, I asked the question because I don't know the answer. Could Putin be the success that he is today without that that Gorbachev shift in vision?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either.
Call Andre and ask him.
I would say this. The reason why I use religious context for it is because religion doesn't require reality. Like the entire basis of it is, faith to function without this, the way things are now.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're looking for this kind of new world and you're trying to tell people, look, this is doable. We can do this. We can do this. I know it doesn't look like it now. I know everything that's confronting you. It's showing.
I might not get there with you, but we will reach the promised land.
Yeah, it's that's what I mean. That's a religious context on some level. Like we deal in analysis. I give you a perfect example. When Mark, we're having a conversation with Mark, and it just came out that the Putin and Trump had the phone call. There were moves that he seemed to be making in regards to ending the war. Mark, as an analyst, is looking at this very cynically because that's its job. And from his point of view, the cynicism is often proven correct. So he's going to look at it through that lens. How he felt about it was different. And I don't know, man, just trying to get over that hurdle. And I know this conversation is a little bit weird, but it's a viable thing because I find us to be in a similar box. Like the notion that Hakeem Jeffries is the leadership of anything is astonishing. The idea that Trump is a monster and yet was able to win as a billionaire and win over the working class is disturbing because that means they fell for the gimmick, right?
The banana in the tailpipe.
And there was no opposition in regards to like a legitimate, viable opposition that people could lump into. And so you feel like, okay, the system is gamed. You have two political parties that realize they don't need to necessarily function to the best interests of the main public because they can always go back and forth. Meaning I can be reflexive. I don't have to be substantive. I can just be reflexive. And the public will get sick of one and move to the other. But in doing so, nothing fundamentally changes. You just get this kind of movement back and forth, almost like this gyration with the public screaming for something different, but not having anything different available. Like, I find us to be in a very similar spot of this need to do something different, this need to get to a different place without any kind of pathway or ability to see our way there. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry. It's this. No. I took this in an odd spot, but I was curious on your take because you're learned, and I always appreciate your point of view. Let's get to Trump and let's get to domestic politics. Okay. So recently, the Republicans passed, they approved their $800 billion cut to Medicaid, $240 billion cut to food stamps. And yet, when they asked Trump, hey, are you going to go after Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid? Trump says, I don't know why you keep asking me that. Nope, not going to touch him. We're just looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. And of course, they're looking at this as like, okay, you're out of your mind. You're not getting $880 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse. You're cutting the program in some fashion, in some way. And not just cutting the program in some fashion, in some way. It's one thing, and ALC made this argument, and I agree with her take. If you tell me that you were looking for waste, fraud, and abuse, fair enough. Everybody would agree with you. Nobody wants a 200-year-old man getting a check. If you, however, then tell me we're going to take that money from waste, fraud, and abuse and put it into tax cuts for the rich, I'm going to say, okay, the jig is up. You've lost me, right? The jig is up. The idea that you're going to, instead of reinvesting that money into the program in order to expand the program, hey, maybe we can give more money to people. Maybe we can extend benefits to people. Maybe we can get more people involved in the program. Their response is, well, this would be great for tax cut. Go into this for me. Like, this is Republican orthodoxy. So it's not like Trump is something different in this. But they are going to fleece America blind. That's my take. Give me your view of this.
You are absolutely right. This is a land grab. This is a data breach by giving Musk access
Mm-hmm.
to the Treasury Department, to the Social Security, and to the IRS databases. So that's a data breach, and we know that one of the most valuable assets that corporations can have now is data. That's why they always ask you for your email address, and why they always ask you for your zip code and all these other kinds of things, so that they can enhance their data collection, and they can sell that information to other outlets. When they talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, what I need you to do is show me the evidence of the waste. We are operating under the assumption that this trope is valid. And I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not saying that there isn't waste, but show it to me. Do some forensic audits and show me some evidence of waste. You can't show me fraud without showing me a determination at the department level through the AG's office, or at a court level through a judge's determination, because fraud is a legal term that has to be determined through a process.
Yes.
Yes. The difference between fraud and mistake is intent. And I know this because I went to law school. The difference between a mistake and fraud is intent. And we can only determine intent through a process. Unless I just say to you, I'm going to defraud you. My intent here is to take your money and not give you what you paid for. Short of that, we have to go through a process to determine whether or not it's a mistake or a fraudulent endeavor.
By the way, and there are two other stories that deviate from this, but they broke, I think, either yesterday or this morning, so I definitely want to talk about it. One, Epstein files are going to be released. Good on that. Pam Bondi, the blonde bombshell. Donald Trump is the first president that has lined himself with just beautiful women all over the place, right? He's trying to turn the White House into to Trump Palace. But whatever. She comes out, says they're going to release the Epstein files today. And she was saying there's some shocking stuff in those files. In fact, I think I even have the clip. But effectively saying they're going to put flight logs out. They're going to put out client lists. They're going to put out all of this stuff. Give me your take on this. I got to be honest. I did not understand why this information wasn't out to begin with. How on earth do you say this man is the apex sex predator? And yet it just goes quiet when he dies. And it's like, okay, well, what about the Johns? What about the client list? How are you telling me that this man is an apex sex predator? You have only shown one or two women associated with it. Then you say he offed himself, which I don't buy the offing himself thing. I think he was off, but whatever. And now they're like, okay, here's the list. Do you think there are going to be consequences with this list?
I can't answer that question until after I see the list.
That's fair.
Because we know that Donald Trump says a lot of things, and then delivers on not even a quarter of what he says. And so for Pam Bondi to say what she has said, okay, Pam, well, show me.
Show the list.
Show me the list. And I don't want to see a redacted list. I don't want to see that big Trump magic marker redacting his name. So there's going to be a list of 20 names, and then there's going to be one name redacted. And, right. So, wow, whose name was that? Right. So, because there is evidence that he has been on the plane. There is evidence that he did go to Fantasy Island with Tattoo.
Uh-huh. Well, they were friends.
The plane, boss, the plane. So, so I can't.
Yeah, we got to see it.
I can't speculate on this one.
Why do you think they kept that list this long? I mean, because Joe Biden could have released this list.
Because because Bill Clinton's name is on the list.
Oh, yeah.
Because there are too many Democrats whose names are on the list, and so I think that's that. And see, now with all of that being said, if you ask me what is Donald Trump's larger mission or agenda with this, I think it is to embarrass Democrats and to embarrass the intelligence state, because Epstein, we know, was a intelligence operator.
That's the belief, yeah.
Who used these sex traps as a way of gaining leverage on individuals in positions of responsibility.
Yep.
And so this to me is consistent with, I'm going to release the information on the Kennedy and King assassinations. Why? Because I think he's after embarrassing, if not exposing, the intelligence, the part of the intelligence apparatus that he believes is also after him.
Yeah.
And so this to me is another way for him to do that. And I'm not saying that it's only Democrats that are on the list. That's not what I'm saying. I think that Epstein was an equal opportunity predator. But that's what and I don't think that Donald Trump is being altruistic, or he's trying to cleanse. This is not the South African what was that council that they had after apartheid?
Oh, yeah.
The where everybody came and confessed their
Truth
sin.
and reconciliation.
Truth and reconciliation.
Yeah.
This is not the Donald Trump Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So he's not being altruistic here. He's not trying to expose history for the sake of history. This is leverage. This is leverage. And so
I would call it revenge. I would call it revenge.
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
I would call it revenge.
Absolutely.
So this is Pam Bondi, and this is her pointing out that this is horrendous. These names, all this stuff is horrible.
Files on your desk. Can we see them, and what's taking so long to release them?
I do. Jesse, there are well over, this will make you sick, 200 victims. 200. So we have well over 250 actually. So we have to make sure that their identity is protected and their personal information. But other than that, I think tomorrow, the personal information of victims. Other than that, I think tomorrow, Jesse, breaking news right now, you're going to see some Epstein information being.
All right, we'll see. Hopefully,
okay. Well over 250 victims.
Yep.
I don't care about the victims. And what I mean by that is, I don't need to know their. I'm not saying I don't care about.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
No. I don't need to know who the victims are. In fact, I rather not know who the victims are, because by identifying them, you are re-victimizing them. And I'm not interested. That's what I should have said. I'm not interested in.
Yeah, you were real strong on that point. I don't care about those victims. I know what you meant. But
I want to be sure everybody listening knows what I mean. Keep the names of the victims secret to protect the victims. Don't re-victimize them. I want to know who are the perpetrators.
Yep.
So, Pam Bondi, you could have stood right there on that set and read the list of perpetrators. You didn't. We don't have to have a brass band and a monkey come out and in a top hat juggling, and now like Puxatawny Phil. Let's pull him out of his stump. Puxatawny Phil, give us the names of the Epstein. No. No, I don't need that. Pam Bondi, you could have right then and there, gone to your phone and said, let me give you the top 10 perpetrators.
Uh-huh.
Keep the names of the victims secret.
One last point before I let you go. And by the way, you're absolutely right. Release the list. God, man, I remember when this first took place, and I think it was Nancy Pelosi's daughter came out and said, hey, just so you know, don't be reflexively defending horrible people, which gets to your point. Like, a lot of these people are going to be Democrats. A lot of them are going to be Democrats. The last point before I let you go, Jeff Bezos has changed. He has effectively neutered the Washington Post, effectively saying we're only going to do propaganda for pro-business. That's all we're going to do. No, this idea of op-eds, all of that stuff is gone. This is no longer something that we are going to involve in the Washington Post. So a billionaire oligarch buys a news organization and effectively neuters the public content or the content of opinions in that piece in favor of we're only going to do pro-business news going forward. That's astonishing. That's astonishing. Give me your take on that. And this will be the closing because I know you have to go for class.
Well, I think you left out one bullet point in his job description: government contractor.
Right there. Right there. Blue Origin.
A lot of people don't know Amazon. That Bezos's company, Amazon, does, I think, billions of dollars of cloud computing and storage for the government.
Yes, they do.
So when you talk about Elon Musk, you're talking about billionaire, you're talking about entrepreneur, but you're talking about government contractor. When you talk about Jeff Bezos, you're talking about Amazon, you're talking about billionaire, you're talking about owner of the Washington Post, you're talking about government contractor.
Right.
And so I think that doesn't surprise me because it goes right in line with all of this is to protect and serve Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. We can leave it at that. Dr. Wilmer Leon, my man, one of my favorites. He is political scientist, nationally syndicated columnist, and host of Connecting the Dots. Check him out, 3 p.m. today. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Be safe.
Gotta go to class.
Have a good one, man. All right. I always try to get him out before 8 o'clock. Like I tell 7:55, 5 minutes. I'll be out. Always appreciate talking to Dr. Wilmer Leon. I always feel informed. I love his points of view. Even when I disagree with him, I enjoy these conversations with him. So shout out to him. Shout out to my chat. Also, you guys make this show possible. Neil Curry, it is always worth both ears. Many thanks. Ozzy, shout out to you. Douglas Miller, shout out to you. Craig Wells, shout out to you. We have a chat. Wraith 636. Peace and gratitude, Jamal. Thank you for all that you do, my man. I just do the news. At the very least, I try to do my best with it. Wilmer is great. This is Vincent Lloyd. Yes, he is. Always appreciate him. My next guest will be coming on shortly. And so I don't know if I have enough time to go into the stories that I want to go into. So I'll go for this part. Do you remember when the mainstream media took issue with anybody that would bring up Joe Biden's cognitive fitness? Now, this started in the debates when Castro brought up that Joe Biden was not altogether there. This was like 4 years before we even really got to the precipice of people pointing out he is not altogether there. All right. Fast forward. Republicans bring up doesn't look like he's altogether there. Lefties bring up, doesn't look like he's altogether there. And mainstream media turned around and shouted those people down. How dare you, sir? How dare you? This is just ageism. You are just going after his age. The man just has a stutter. He is completely there. And then you get one Democrat after the next coming on TV and saying, Joe Biden is there. I was in a meeting with him. He was sharp as a tack. You get other people coming out saying, Joe Biden is hard sex with Joe Biden 3 times a week. He is altogether there. All right, fair enough. Hard sex, behind the scenes meetings, he's sharp as a tack. He's just not sharp as a tack when he's dealing with the public. And you get these situations where Joe Biden goes wandering into the great beyond and somebody has to grab him in order to bring him back. Other situations where he doesn't quite seem to be able to know where he is. And all of this stuff was being played out in front of the American audience with mainstream media telling you, don't believe your lying eyes. Believe what we are telling you. He is actually sharp behind the scenes. Oh my God, we can't have Trump, so we must defend Joe Biden's cognitive fitness. Jake Tapper was one of those people doing this. And he gets very upset with this woman for talking about Joe Biden's mental decline. Take a look.
Every time he comes on stage or they turn to him, I'm like, Joe, can you get it out? Let's get the words out, Joe. You kind of feel bad for him.
How do you think it makes little kids with stutters feel when they see you make a comment like that?
First and foremost, I had no idea that Joe Biden ever suffered from a stutter. I think what we see on stage with Joe Biden, Jake, is very clearly a cognitive decline.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. It makes me uncomfortable.
You are
to watch somebody on stage
it's so amazing. It's so amazing to me that
try and figure out an answer.
A cognitive decline.
Well, when you're trying to tell me that what I was suggesting was
I think that you were
stuttering,
mocking his stutter. Yeah, I think you were mocking his stutter, and I think you have absolutely no standing to diagnose somebody's cognitive decline. I would think that somebody in the Trump family would be more sensitive to people who do not have.
Jake Tapper, not feeling that point of view, not feeling that take, and is shouting her down. How dare you? How dare you? You're going after that man for a stutter. How do you think little babies, how do you think those little babies feel with you going after Joe Biden stutter? What about the babies? We must protect the babies. Fast forward. And the same Jake Tapper who is going after this woman, saying you have no standing in order to evaluate the mental fitness of Joe Biden or anybody else. What is your medical degree? What is your medical standing that you have in order to do this? That same Jake Tapper turns around and writes a book. This Original Sin.
Officials.
And in that book, The Original Sin, Jake Tapper is exposing the cover-up of Joe Biden's mental decline. I hope you understand what I'm saying here. The same Jake Tapper that was going after and attacking that woman, saying, "How dare you talk about mental decline for Joe Biden? He just has a stutter, miss. It's just a stutter." That same Jake Tapper is now writing a book called The Original Sin about how all of these people were covering up Joe Biden's mental decline. I imagine he's leaving himself out of that mix of people who hide or hid that mental decline, despite the fact you have videos like that of him shouting down people, pointing out the same mental decline that he is now writing about in his book. You can't make it up. You can't make it up. I swear you can't make it up. I need to bring in my guest, Arnaud Devillet. He is an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law, and he is a good friend of the show. Arnaud, man, how you doing? You doing all right?
I'm doing great, Jamal. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm dealing with ridiculously hypocritical media. I don't know if you saw that, all of these people, before getting into the story, all of these people were talking about Joe Biden's mental decline, saying he doesn't seem to be altogether there. He's losing his mind. And media in this country was like, how dare you? How dare you talk about his mental decline? And then after Joe Biden had that debate, everybody was like, oh my God, He is not wrapped tight. How is this man running the country, let alone, running an outhouse? And now you get books by people like Jake Tapper pointing out, I can't believe that they covered up his mental decline. It's like, dude, you were one of those people doing that. It's just wow. Thank you for joining me, man. I really do appreciate you joining me. One of the things I wanted to hit with you, apparently the mineral deal, some of the text is coming out for the mineral deal. Initially, Zelensky floated this deal with the idea that he can get security guarantees for these minerals. Like, I'm going to do the minerals. We're going to get security guarantees. The world is great. We can entangle the United States into Ukraine for the foreseeable future. He is not getting security guarantees. There's that. And it goes beyond rare earth minerals. As I was telling the audience earlier today, the language for this is going to have to be negotiated. But Zelensky this is a raping. I don't know a better word for it. So right here, the government of Ukraine will contribute to the fund 50% of all revenues earned by the future monetization of all relevant Ukrainian government-owned natural resources and assets, whether owned directly or indirectly by the Ukrainian government, defined as deposits of minerals, hydrocarbons, oil, natural gas, and other extractable materials. I don't even know what the hell that is, but basically anything coming out of the ground. And other infrastructure relevant to natural resource assets, such as liquefied natural gas terminals and port infrastructure, as agreed by both participants, as may be further described in the fund agreement. For the avoidance of doubt, such future sources of revenues do not include current sources of revenue, which are already part of the general budget of Ukraine. I read that and I thought to myself, Jesus, how do you sign that? Like, how are you, as Zelensky, effectively selling out your country and you are not even getting security guarantees for it? And when Donald Trump was asked, what is Ukraine getting for this? And Trump was like, we already gave him $350 billion. That's what they got for it. That's astonishing. Ukraine has lost like 20% of its territory, 600,000 people. And then the country that kind of coaxed them into this, that helped overthrow the government, turns around and says, by the way, we need 50% of everything going forward. I have no words for that. Give me your take on this. This deal just seems like a rape.
Yeah, well, I have a word for it. It's called a shakedown.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah, well, to be sure, much has been made about this so-called deal. But we have to look at the legalese within the deal. Zelensky, and God knows I'm not a fan of Zelensky, but Zelensky actually said something that a lot of people seem to somewhat overlook, which is that, and he was right about that, this was the whole, everything, whatever amount of monies we're talking about that was paid by Washington into the Ukraine project was under the form of grants. There was never any kind of contractual setup. It's like Lindsey Graham used to say, whatever we're spending into Ukraine right now, it's worth it because they're doing the fighting for us. Well, that should have been on its face enough. With the idea that, if we succeed, we'll get our hands ultimately down the road on some very precious mineral. I think he mentioned something like 7 trillion or something like that. But the idea was, this is free money, and you don't have to pay it back. And this is actually underlined by Zelensky himself, who about a year ago came out and said, please keep giving us support, financial support. You could give us a loan, and we would, sit down and work out some kind of protocol, so as to pay you guys back. So if you look at the context, in contractual law, contract law, there's two ways to look at it. You can look at it as the four-corner approach, what's inside the document to the extent there exists a document, or you can look at it as what's called the Corbyn approach, which is the totality of circumstances, the talk. And here, if you look at it since there's no agreement, obviously there was no contract, you have to look at what was, what statements were made, what was the behavior of the parties, how did the parties behave insofar as reflecting any kind of intent bearing on the performances on all sides. And at this point, Zelensky is right. It's like we don't owe you anything, which is something Trump doesn't want to hear, because he has to,
Right.
in his political communication, he has to come up with something swiftly to placate his base. That he's the new guy in town, the new sheriff in town, and this is an element of language which has been peddled around by his first circle. And he has to show that he's somehow getting something for the US.
Mm-hmm.
Except that they're signing the contract after the performances, which is kind of weird. Add to this the question bearing in as far as Ukraine, what's left of it as a sovereign country. A few days ago, there was on the anniversary, the sad anniversary of the conflict in Ukraine.
Right.
As the Europeans were in Kiev, the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, convened, and they actually failed to endorse Zelensky, only insofar as, until the holding of new elections. So
Mhm.
what kind of mandate does that give him to basically sell away the country's resources? We're talking right now about a framework, as far as whatever document is supposed to be signed today in DC. But down the road, there's going to have to be a more detailed document. And that document has to be, at the very least, notwithstanding Zelensky's legitimacy as the head of the executive, quote unquote, has to be ratified by the parliament, Ukrainian parliament.
Oh, that is such a good
And
point.
they are all coming out right now. I'm talking about somebody like Dubinsky, for instance, who's being detained on charges of high treason, but who somehow is able to communicate via X. And I know, and he's coming out and says, there's no way we're going to validate this thing. This is extortion.
Yeah.
And we're
It's
not going to want to be politically responsible for selling out the country's assets like this. We paid, with the blood of Ukrainians. That's basically, that should be enough.
It is
so
exactly
this
extortion. You're absolutely right.
This whole thing makes, to me, is political maneuvering, political posturing on the part of Trump. And Zelensky is in a position where, in the context of the sequence, the last 10 days, 2 weeks sequence, he must have been told by his immediate circle, please don't make any wave, just go to DC, sign whatever the guy wants you to sign. But it's a non-starter. I mean, legally speaking, as far as the Ukrainian way of doing business, as far as, adopting any kind of, especially of that nature, any kind of draft law, this is a non-starter. Whenever a new president, if a new president gets elected in this country formerly known as Ukraine, I call it country 404. I'm not the only one. I think it suits it well. The first order of business will be to call into question the validity and legality of any kind of documents signed by Zelensky with the new US administration. Politically, that will be the first order of business. And you'll see that this is going to get very, very hickey very quickly.
Yeah,
I don't see anything like this, flying the coup.
Because as you point out, one of the first questions that they're going to ask is, okay, well, Zelensky is not the legitimate president. That like, if they are looking to get out of this deal, one of the first things they're going to bring up is, okay, well, Zelensky declared martial law. He blew off elections. And they're probably going to look into Ukrainian law and say, okay, well, he is not the legitimate person. So it doesn't matter what he signed. This is the Putin issue, right? About the war, where Putin is like, Zelensky is not legitimate. And so any contract that he signs will be irrelevant. So we don't want a situation where 6 years later, they come back and say, hey, by the way, those agreements are null and void because Zelensky was never really the legitimate leader of the country. The same thing is true for this, or it has to be true for this. At the very least, they have to be thinking about it. What they want seems to be security guarantees. What Trump doesn't seem to want to give is security guarantees. And it seems like Ukraine believes that in future negotiations, they'll be able to get those security guarantees. Give me your take on this, because all of this stuff is going to be working simultaneously with trying to end the war and get a deal to end the war. And they, I guess, believe that this is an end. This is a way of latching America to this project of Ukraine. Basically, well, if you have security guarantees, I mean, I'm saying this poorly. It's this. If you have economic agreements with us, then you have vested interests in protecting those economic agreements. So whether you have security guarantees with us or not is secondary to the point. You're going to want to be able to extract money out of these resources, which means you need to, on some level, protect this country where the resources are being held. That seems to be the argument that they're running with, that even if we don't get official security guarantees, by de facto, you're going to want to protect the land in order to get and extract the material wealth out of the land that you're going to now own. Do you think it's going to work that way? For one, do you agree with that? That seems to be the thinking of it. And two, do you think that's going to work for them to get this kind of protection that they want from the United States, whereas the U.S. wants to effectively pull out and leave it to Europe?
Well, let's get one thing out of the way. Trump already said, is extremely clear about this. Ukraine won't be joining NATO. So,
right.
This being said, the alternative is to have Ukraine enter into a bilateral agreement with the US, not unlike what it's done with European nations bearing on security, assistance. Then it depends. It remains to be seen what kind of security assistance. Does this involve troop deployments? Does that include training, delivery of equipment? We don't know any of this, but the idea, and I think Zelensky was coached by his European partners in his conversation, distance conversation with Trump, is to try to get some kind of situation document, something that legally we can use down the road to pull the U.S. back into, if and when Trump gets replaced by someone more malleable, get the U.S. to be able to justify getting re-involved in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So the idea right now is to try to preserve appearances, but at least get Trump to concede in any kind of future agreement, again, to the extent it's validated by the Ukrainian Rada, which is a big if, before we even talk about security agreements, security guarantees.
You don't even think that the Rada is going to validate this? Like, that the deal is so bad that the Rada is going to be like,
there you go. Because, I mean, politically, for whoever succeeds Zelensky, we paid in blood. We destroyed an entire generation. And now you're trying to basically say we owe you that money, and you are dragging your feet on taking responsibility in providing long-term security guarantees. How can I, the new president of Ukraine, whoever I am down the road, how am I going to be able to sell this to the Ukrainian Rada?
Yeah.
Whose approval I need?
Or the Ukrainian public.
Yes.
Yeah. That is.
So it's a non-starter. It just makes no sense on its face.
But Zelensky is coming to sign it tomorrow.
It's a framework agreement. There won't be any specifics. It has no legal value. It's all. That's what I'm saying. It's all about political posturing.
Yeah.
Zelensky is trying to appease Trump. Trump needs this concrete result, because they were playing a game of roosters the last 10 days.
Right.
So the last thing Zelensky needs is to behave in such a way that leads to Trump losing face internationally, and especially domestically. So this is this kind of kabuki theater going on right now.
Oh, it's fascinating. That deal is grotesque. And Boris Johnson comes out and approves the deal. Approves it. Now, Boris Johnson is the same one that jumped in and scuttled the Istanbul agreements that were taking place, where they were very close to a deal. This is either through Naftali Bennett. There was somebody else, even Ukrainian sources point out that they were close to a deal. They had the framework for a deal. Boris Johnson scuttles the deal. Before I go to Boris Johnson, though, I want to play the clip from Steve Bannon, because I think there's a dichotomy between these 2 points of views. And I think Bannon on this one is right. And I think his rightness goes into why Boris Johnson wants Zelensky to sign that deal. So this is Bannon talking about the deal and effectively saying, walk away. Don't get involved. Don't touch it. Just walk away. Don't have anything to do with Ukraine.
Well, let me ask you about the Ukraine war resolution, because there's this framework now being proposed. It's a little ambiguous, an economic partnership agreement. Besant was in Kyiv saying that in exchange for your agreement to this partnership, U.S. aid will continue. Donald Trump himself said it's kind of haphazardly, but he did say aid could continue under this framework. It seems like this is going to be a further entanglement of the U.S. in Ukraine, and who's going to extract the rare minerals? Much of them are under Russian occupation.
My advice is walk the fuck away. I want to walk away so hard. I'm even prepared to say, okay, maybe we don't even investigate, which I think we have to, but we have to walk away. I don't want their minerals. Okay, there's enough minerals in the rest of the world.
What's the reasoning behind this proposal then? Like, why?
Bannon is looking at this as like, they're trying to keep us involved. Walk away, leave it alone. And to back up his point is the fact that Boris Johnson is for it. Boris Johnson is on stage saying this effectively, this is sign the deal.
When I look at for instance, the reality of what the Americans are proposing, I am not that disheartened. Everybody knows there's a minerals deal on the table today, right? And I think it has every prospect of being signed. And frankly, I think it should be signed because it commits the United States in black and white to a free, sovereign, and secure Ukraine, and it commits the United States to future financing for Ukraine. That is not to be sneezed at. And yes, to get back to Winston Churchill, John, he paid a terrible price. The UK paid.
See, he's acting like, oh, well, this is just like a lend-lease. That's all this is. And he says it outright. This commits the U.S. to effectively be stuck with Ukraine going forward.
Which is exactly what they want.
It's fascinating. Like the politics that is taking place here is just fascinating. Trump is trying to get something out of it. As you point out, he wants to look strong. He wants to solidify his base. Hey, look what I did. I was able to get this money back from Ukraine. Zelensky wants the U.S. to be engaged going forward. Europe wants the U.S. to be engaged going forward. This is their gateway of trying to do it. But your take is the Rada is never going to sign it. Zelensky is not legitimate to sign it one way or the other, meaning there are no real legal entanglements associated with it. Right now, it's entirely theater.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Actually, and Johnson is lying. There's no specific contract or agreement that's been drafted yet, especially bearing on security guarantees. So he's outright lying, saying that this is actually what's on the table, and Trump should sign it. Mm-hmm. He's just trying, but he's in his role. I mean, he's trying to basically feed the narrative that this is something we can perfectly live with. We as bureaucrats, whoever is not MAGA, in terms of Ukraine. So it makes perfect sense. But Johnson is a politician, so he has a certain relationship vis-a-vis the truth.
Yeah.
But what is interesting to keep in mind, though, is that if we look about Ukrainian minerals, and the juicy part of it, 70 to 80% of what matters in terms of minerals and rare minerals, earth, they are Russian territories now.
Yes.
There's not much left, west of the Dnieper River. So I don't even understand where they get those figures, as far as what, the worth of what's underneath the ground.
They lie.
You would need to automatically engage Russia to exploit and to jointly develop extraction of those juicy minerals, which are all on Russian territories now.
Apparently, according to Bloomberg, Zelensky lied. Zelensky put out that there was like $500 billion or something like that. They have no idea what that number is, and it's not 500 billion. And so, again, all of this stuff is weirdly theoretical. I guess we're going to see whether or not Zelensky signs that contract on Friday. And if so, what happens going forward?
Framework agreement.
Yeah, the framework agreement. Yes, the framework agreement. Thank you. One of the other things I wanted to hit with you, there are talks that are taking place today. The talks between the United States and Russia have excelled. They're now in Istanbul. They have finished their Riyadh talks. They're now in Istanbul. What is the conversation taking place? From my understanding, it's something to do with the embassies and getting the embassies restarted and kicking off the process for later future talks. What's going on in these conversations? What are the conversations that Russia and the United States are having in Istanbul right now?
Well, one of your guests actually covered it very thoroughly, Mr. Sloboda. He was very detailed about it, and I wouldn't have to add much more than what he said in one of the shows a few days back. Right now, they're starting from so far out that we're still dealing with technicalities right now. Trying to put together a working mechanism which allows communication to flow through in respect with the Vienna Convention, respect for each other's diplomatic property, respect to the physical integrity of the diplomatic staff. And then and only then we'll be able to start sitting down and get working on substantive issues, among which Ukraine is but one of those issues. There are a lot of issues to discuss. So, and this delves into what we were just talking about. I think right now, Trump has to fill the media/political space until those talks lead to a situation where we can really sit down with Russia and initiate this détente. This is, I think, what's going on right now. But again, we've had 3 years of literally no contact at all. I mean, we've never had that even during the most tense moment of the Cold War. So, before we start, talking about, and there's a lot of things on the table, which are win-win situation both for the US and the Russian Federation. But right now, it's really about those are technical delegations that are meeting, to be sure, experts, and so they've got to work those things through. They've got to reestablish trust and confidence in the process of talking to each other before addressing any kind of substantive issue. This is really what it's all about. Those are technical meetings right now. So we hope that the pace of these meetings accelerate, so that we can, start looking at, real discussions on real issues as quickly as possible.
What do you think people, as this play out, what do you think people are not seeing in it? Meaning, like you said, Trump is filling the space. He is effectively the political gravity at this point. I mean, for God's sake, all of these shows have been about Trump. It's not because I like the guy. It's just he's filling the political space. But what is people missing out of this? Meaning, regardless of the reporting and everything else, what is the thing that's under the reporting that is relevant, that is important, that people are just fundamentally not seeing, or it's not being reported, or they're just missing in all of this?
Well, I would say that we're dealing with a pivot. This is the start of a long process, which will see the US essentially pulling out of Europe altogether. There are talks about, at this point, there are just things being peddled around. There's nothing, written down on paper. But strategically, the US, under Trump at least, wants to pull out of Europe completely. So they might be willing to discuss, pulling out NATO troops out of Eastern Europe. This might be something that Russia will try to extract during those negotiations. Keeping in mind that, with the inclusion now of Sweden and Finland, which are border state with the Russian Federation, now in NATO, you have to diffuse the situation by all means. And so the Europeans should be basically left under no illusion that any kind of political and or military adventurism that they may be tempted in the future to reinitiate against the Russian Federation, they're on their own, essentially. Right now, the powers that be, notwithstanding the political parties in the US, the deep states, the people who basically run the destinies of the West at large, but the US more particularly, that faction anyway, they realize they've lost a lot of time and wasted a lot of resources in this Ukraine/Russian project, while at the same time China is growing stronger by the day. And there's really, a sense of urgency about, hence the idea for Trump, if he wants to please his sponsors, those deep sponsors, he has to resolve this Ukraine situation and start pivoting, into the Asian Pacific. This is the next theater. The idea right now is that China is building a fleet, which in a few years will be able to project power outside its regional sphere of influence. This would mean essentially, not unlike what we've seen at the beginning of the 20th century between Great Britain and Imperial Germany, that we would have a transfer of economic power and political power. One of the reasons, not the only one, but one of the main reasons leading up to the tensions which spilled into World War I was that Great Britain was seeing its hegemony being challenged
by Germany's
with the German Navy, the German dreadnoughts,
right?
And so this ability to project power, if it's being challenged by a peer-to-peer competitor, and if you allow it to reach parity, most likely than not, it will lead to an open confrontation. Let's make no mistake about it. A lot of people have been talking about isolationist tendencies and temptations in the US under Donald Trump. I don't believe this in a second. Trump is just a different face of the same power projection that has defined the US at least since the days of Teddy Roosevelt. It's not a coincidence that Trump has a statue of Teddy Roosevelt in his office. So it's just a repackaged, veneer. But in the end, the primacy of the U.S. as a premier inter pares is stronger than ever. I mean, under Trump, it makes no difference to me. It's just shedding all the woke and this kind of concentration on confronting Russia. But the idea is, ultimately, if you can't get through the door, you're gonna get through the window. And right now, the consensus in Washington is that there's no way at this current point in time that they'll be able to bludgeon or at least strategically downgrade the Russian Federation. It's impossible, and they can invoke all they want, the white paper produced by the RAND Corporation on this issue. The train has left the station. So now they have to basically try to cut their losses, which is what Trump is doing, trying to cut their losses, sell this to the American public, especially those who voted for him, as somehow we somewhat managed to preserve our interest in Ukraine. And we'll leave the European, if they want to keep doing this, they'll buy our equipment in the event. We'll force them to increase their military budgets to reflect their intent. And, we'll make out good money on this, but we have better fish to fry right now. And we can't be spending too much time in this. We have to come up with some kind of agreement. And don't forget, the idea is to try to do a reverse Kissinger. They're going to try to basically split Moscow from Beijing. This is what it's all about. The long term is to because they realize that under the Obama and Biden administration, they essentially managed to render possible the worst nightmare in American foreign policy, which is to get the Russians and Chinese to get as close as there's never been. And this combination is unbeatable. It's a world breaker. So you have to look at it. The fundamental is this: if you want to get a chance to save the U.S. from bankruptcy and usher an era where the U.S. will not be the unipolar power that we've seen, in the 1990s, but at least a center of world power, if you were to preserve this scenario, first thing to do is stop the Russophobia, engage Russia, try to get Russia as close to you as possible.
Right.
So that you can, have a chance at some point down the road to confront China before China is too much of a hegemon itself, which, would prevent you from curtailing its aspiration. To the extent China has aspiration to world domination, which I personally believe it doesn't, but in the US, they only think in those terms, unfortunately. They do projection on others.
Yeah, we think in zero sum terms. I've had conversations with like KJ No, who does reporting on China, and as KJ points out, China believes in win-win relationships. Now, you may get some people like Mearsheimer. It's like, that's nonsense. China is going to be a great power, and they're going to act like great powers. I guess we're going to find out. I think that horse has left a barn. I mean, we're in the era of hypersonic missiles. Like, what is an aircraft carrier to a hypersonic missile? Like, our world is just getting very different. I want to play a clip for you. This is Donald Trump. And I think this clip is insidiously brilliant. And I can't believe I'm using a term to say what Trump is doing here. But listen to what he says here. And I want to get your take on this clip. Come on.
President Putin distinct in any way?
He's a very smart guy. He's a very cunning person. But I've dealt with some people I've dealt with some really bad people. But I will tell you, as far as this is concerned, you have to understand, he had no intention, in my opinion, of settling this war. I think he wanted the whole thing. When I got elected, we spoke, and I think we're going to have a deal. I can't guarantee that. A deal is a deal. Lots of crazy things happen in deals, right? But I think we're going to have a deal. If I didn't get elected, I believe he would have just continued to go through Ukraine, and over a period of time, a lot of people would have been killed, would have lasted for a period of time. And the reason that Ukraine, and I have great respect for the Ukraine as fighters, they're great fighters, but without our equipment, that war would have been over, like people said, in a very short period of time. And if you remember, I gave the javelin.
Of course, Trump's take is, well, Putin wanted it all. And if it wasn't for me being elected, he would have just kept going and taken it all. Now, let's be clear. Putin is still going. Like, the Russian military is still taking territory and pushing Ukrainian military out of Kursk and everything else. So it's not like they've stopped. But I think there's something brilliant in using the framing that the West has went with as a ploy at the very end of it. It says, see, he didn't get it all. He wanted it all. He didn't get it all. I came to an agreement. I made a deal. I'm Donald Trump. I protected the integrity of whatever is left of Ukraine. And the fact that Putin didn't get it all is the thing that I can sell to the American public and to the rest of the world as the feather in my cap. It's my face-saving mechanism. Putin didn't get it all. He wanted it all. He didn't get it all. So I'm Donald Trump. I was able to do that. Do you think that's where he's going with this? Because one of two things is true. Either he believes that Putin wanted it all, or he's using this as a political device in order to justify and to save face in any kind of agreement that he's going to make in order to end the war. What are your thoughts?
Well, to be sure, I mean, the objective of the special military operation, or what in the West people call Russian aggression, is to demilitarize Ukraine and to denazify Ukraine.
Right.
So one could make the case that although Russia has no interest in taking the whole of Ukraine, albeit some conservative, extremely conservative voices, in the Russian political landscape, who consider that Ukraine is historically and spiritually, ultimately forever linked to Russia, which is an understandable viewpoint as well, if you put yourself in their shoes. But if you are a politician, you are head of state, you have to somehow try to stand in the middle of all this in a way that is a balancing posture. And let's be honest, I mean, Western Ukraine are not ethnic speaking Russians by and large. So the last thing you would want is to occupy the whole of Ukraine and find yourself with a guerrilla warfare on your hands.
Right.
So ultimately, the idea was to preserve the physical integrity of the Russian-speaking ethnic Russian population, which happens to live in the east of Ukraine. So now, to the extent some of those areas happen to be the richest in minerals, well, that's far for the course. But point is, there's no appetite in Russia to
take it all
at the highest level. I would say to take it all. Now, to the extent one of the objectives is to denazify you may actually, if there's no somehow peace negotiation, which sees the most radical faction of the Banderites running the country right now being dealt with, Russia has no choice. They have to fulfill the objectives of the operation. Otherwise, the head of the snake will remain active, and so they can't afford to have that. So ultimately, what you would want is a new round of election with Russia providing figures, who are representing an alternate viewpoint than of the neo-Nazi crowd there, and try to basically eradicate, maybe proceed to some kind of arrest. It's easy to at some point neutralize those people. There's not that many of them anyway, so if there's a new head of state, there are possibilities to neutralize those people once and for all. But it remains an issue, yes. So Trump, to answer your question, somehow rides on this because it's not completely ultimately untrue. But like you say, basically, if it wasn't for me coming in and engaging them in some kind of peace deal with the idea that we need to put an end to the violence, the Russian would have taken it all. So we got paid, and you'll see it on Friday. I'll get this guy from in the green fatigues to come and sign the deal. He will come and show me fealty. But also politically, we preserved the whole country from being taken over by the Russian army.
But doesn't Trump have a point in a weird way? I mean, because and I am even curious on whether or not Russia preferred Joe Biden or Trump in earnest. I mean, to your point, if Trump makes a deal and the catch becomes, okay, well, we need to have elections, we need a legitimate leader of the country. Okay, does that deal include, as you pointed out, having a Russian candidate or a candidate backed by Russia to run against whatever random candidates coming from West Ukraine? Meaning Joe Biden would have kept the war going, or Kamala Harris would have kept the war going. She wouldn't have came to
Blinken.
Yeah. Or
Anthony Blinken. And Nuland, yes.
Yeah. And so the war would have had to keep going. How would Russia have dealt with that, by the way? If Kamala Harris had won, is the goal, or was the goal, just we're going to get to the Dnieper and we're going to stop? Or is it, to your point, we would have to take it all and we would just have to deal with the fact that there's a guerrilla war going forward for the foreseeable future? How do you think they would have dealt with a Kamala Harris victory as opposed to what Trump is doing here, was he's trying to make some kind of agreement?
Well, I think the pace of the operations will not have changed that much, because remember, the idea is to inflict a strategic defeat on NATO. So you have to basically bleed them dry economically. So there's no point in going blitzkrieg on Kiev. The pace of the conflict, the way it's being run, is a masterstroke. If you deal with them militarily too quickly and too swiftly, you allow them time to regroup and come back at it down the road, maybe galvanize their own population, try to sell what we've been hearing, that now he's coming next for France and Germany and what have you. So I don't think we would have seen a difference in pace. I think this grinding, slowly but surely grinding down the economic potential of NATO land countries would have been and would remain the objective, so that you set them back decades, essentially.
Yeah.
That's my take on it. Now, the problem is that with the people around Biden, and who can assume fairly that would have been the same configuration around Harris, which is, let's be honest, not up to the job. So we would have had those federal bureaucrats, Russophobes to the T, basically trying to goad Russia into reacting harshly, using those long-range missiles, nuclear terrorism, which is still something that could be going on right now. I mean, let's not forget that the Ukrainian clique right now is backed against the corner, and to the extent they've read into Trump's game, which is basically, we're going to leave you hanging out to dry, they might decide to do something like this. So, we're still treading in very dangerous water to this day, notwithstanding, this sense of optimism that we've been somehow witnessing
Yeah.
taking over
No, I
in
feel it.
DC.
I do feel a bit of optimism. I hate this war, man. I hate the fact that all of these people are being killed senselessly. What's the conversation in Moscow about this? I'm curious. I mean, like in the US, like I said, Trump is the gravity. I mean, he is in doing executive orders. He's getting people fired. He's fighting with judges. He's fighting with tariffs on Europe. It's like he is the gravity. Like there's no way to get away from a story because he's in all of the stories. What is the conversation in Moscow, though? Like the Russian media, what are they saying about this? And this could be the last question, I think. What's the talk over there?
Well, the talk over there, to make a long story short, is we like what we see, but until we, see a specific deeds, actions is what matters, not words.
Yeah.
So now they understand that Trump needs time to, situate himself. He's had to deal with cabinet confirmations. There's still the Russia crowd trying to, credit him with being, a pawn of Putin or what have you. So you got to give him, breathing room, and you have to be able to, read between the lines and not take wholeheartedly at the first degree everything Trump says. This being said, let's say, by the time we roll into spring, summer, and to the extent now we are getting communication reestablished, we'll see, if those words are followed by actions. And the Russian right now are very, they got burned. They got burned with Minsk. They got burned with Istanbul. They know that fundamentally the West word has no value right now. It's completely demonetized, and they go with what they know. They go from what the record says, and the record says, be extremely careful, stand back, and don't make any rash moves, and let them, play out their cards, and we'll see. We'll judge on factual evidence. But the idea is we're open to negotiating. We're even open to talk to Europe without any precondition. That was repeated by Putin again a few days ago. They want to put an end to this, but they want their security interests preserved. And so basically we have to deal also with the elephant in the middle of the room, and which is NATO expansion. And this was talked about by Mersheimer and Sachs in Brussels, I think, last week.
Lavrov mentioned it too.
That's yes.
Yeah.
So that's the original scene. That's the original problem. This goes back 30 years ago in the waning days of the Cold War. Yeah, some people will say, but what are you talking about? It was not in writing. But now we've had last couple of days, we've had a few documents surfacing, which are kind of, to be sure, like diplomatic communications, but who allude without any kind of doubt that NATO was not to expand 1 inch. That was the deal. We'll allow the unification of Germany, but NATO has to stay where it's at in its current borders. And this, we need to unravel last 30 years of misguided foreign policy as far as Russian security interests are concerned.
Right.
And that's a big undertaking. It's not just Ukraine.
Tell me something. What does Putin want out of this? Like, and I know the terrestrial issue of ending the war or preventing NATO expansion, but is there something else beyond that he wants in any kind of negotiation that he's going to have with the US? Because as you pointed out, Ukraine is just an item on a list of items that they're going to be talking about. They're going to be talking about the Arctic, as you pointed out, the embassies, any kind of exploitation of resources in Ukraine. Like, as you pointed out, Russia has like 20% of Ukraine now. That's part of the Russian Federation, and any exploitation of the minerals is going to have to go through Putin also. Is there something else in regards to, let's say, security architecture of Europe that he wants? And what does that look like? And this could be the last question. I'm sorry. I know I said the last one was the last one. I'll let this one be the last one. What is it that Putin wants out of these negotiations beyond Ukraine?
I think Putin wants a security architecture that is continental in nature, meaning that if he has a partner in Washington who's willing to somehow pull out the US, the problem is the US presence in Europe. There's no point for this anymore. There's got to be a new outlook, a new paradigm emerging. And right now, this new paradigm is struggling to emerge from the Cold War rhetorics, the post-Cold War rhetorics even. And this is what Putin wants to try to facilitate, to promote. Yep. And right now, he has someone in Washington who might be able to help him do that. Don't forget, we mentioned that most of the minerals are Russian territory now. But do not forget, there's also a vast amount of resources east of the Ural Mountains that needs to be developed. I mean, Russia is 1/6 of the world landmass. It numbers about 150 million people. But if you do not develop actively this huge swath of land and make it attractive, somebody at some point is going to create a power vacuum. And we don't know what the relationship might be with China 20, 25 years down the road. China is bursting at the seam with the population, and they have needs. And they also have, in some quarters of the political leadership in China, there are people who have claims, historical claims on the Far East, what is today Russian Far East. So I would say that at the level of the Kremlin, you have all those historical dimension in mind. So you need to, it's the eagle with two heads, the two-headed eagle, right? You need to provide security for the next 30, 50 years at least. You need to lay the ground for security architecture in Europe, which sees Russia being integrated into the European family, the European homestead. And then if you can get that, you need to basically get investors to create as much joint enterprises to develop your own Eastern hinterland, so that down the road, you can somehow contain what might likely be at some point Chinese, lurking over, this area, which, as far as they're concerned, is for the taking. There's a faction in China that thinks about this. Right now, they are not audible. They are completely under control. But 20, 25 years down the road, it might be different. Keep in mind that Premier Xi Jinping made a remark recently. He talked about the sacrifice of the 100 million workers who made China what it is today, which is an economic powerhouse. China, if they have one resources, it's the human, resources.
1.5
if
billion.
Their viability, if their viability, there's about 20 million Chinese right now who are considered somewhat expandable. I mean, they have no families, they have no kids. It would be easy for China down the road, if somehow they don't get they get cornered in terms of resources, to be able to militarily get what they need. Yes.
Wow.
So Russia has to think about this. Don't forget that international politics is not about being buddies. It's all about interest and things, from one era to the next. Alliances change, they shift. And you have to look at the big picture all the time. And Putin is someone who was always trying to look at the big picture. He thinks in terms of decades, not in terms of next week media sequence.
Arno Devile. He is an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law, participated in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein, along with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of American Political Consensus. Arno, man, I always appreciate these conversations. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Jamal. Talk to you
You have
soon.
a good one. Be safe. Oh, there's a lot of fascinating politics that are taking place. And look, as I pointed out before, Trump is just the gravity. Like, I look at my videos and it's like one video after the next is about Trump. It's about different factions in that sense. but you're stuck with it because he's the political gravity, especially on this particular issue. There's something I want to highlight, as I pointed out, and I can cut this as a specific video. So Trump coming out and saying this, and as I pointed out to Arno, I think it's a big deal. I don't think it's trivial. So, of course, he makes the mineral deal. All right. And so you get comments like this. They point out, hey, what is Ukraine getting for this? Trump comes out and says this. I want to piggyback this comment on another comment that he made, because I think the politics that is being played here is actually far more sophisticated than I think we typically give Donald Trump credit for. And no, this is not me simping for Trump. I just think the politics works very well. I would say the same thing about Boris Johnson when he was running against Jeremy Corbyn, and he beat the stuffing out of Jeremy Corbyn, despite the fact that I love Jeremy Corbyn. This is Trump.
With Ukraine and this mineral deal, what does Ukraine get in return, Mr. President?
$350 billion and lots of equipment, military equipment, and the right to fight on, and originally the right to fight. Look, Ukraine, I will say they're very brave and they're good soldiers, but without the United States and its money and its military equipment, this war would have been over in a very short period of time. In fact, I was the one that gave the javelins. You remember the famous javelins? That was me. That wasn't Obama. It wasn't Biden. It wasn't anybody else. It was me. And they wiped out a lot of tanks with those javelins. And the expression was that Obama gave sheets and I gave the javelins. That was a big deal at the time. It wiped out. That was the beginning when people said, wow, that's something. Well,
that wasn't the beginning. 2014 was the beginning. And you probably could go back further than that. Trump is making this argument, and I guess he's making two arguments at once. And the first, he's pointing out, look, what they're getting out of it is the fact that we've given them hundreds of billions of dollars. That's what they're getting out of it. Now, his language is imprecise because he's not saying what they will get. He's talking about what we gave them. So his argument is we gave them $350 billion. I don't know if that number is exactly right, but whatever. It may be more, maybe less. But that's his case. We already gave them that. So we are recouping what we gave them. That's his framing. All right. Then he says, well, I'm the one that gave him javelins. Yeah, because if you remember at the time, they were going after Trump saying that he was a Putin plant and that he was a Manchurian candidate. And as a Manchurian candidate was effectively working for the Russians. And so anything that Donald Trump did under that context was folded under this notion that Donald Trump had an alliance with Putin. Putin got him elected. And because of that, Trump was a plant to Putin. Now, this is fantastic because, you know, you get $100 million from Miriam Adelson and nobody cares. Meaning they're using this case as if Trump is somehow working with the Russians. And yet they don't make the case that Trump is simping for Israel when he gets $100 million from Miriam Adelson in order to expel Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. I'm just saying, it is wild to me that one with zero evidence gets ran with, and the other, with all the evidence in the world, gets fundamentally ignored. Astonishing to me, but let's keep going. Then, at another point, Trump says this. Listen to what he says here, because the language is very important.
And the javelins are the things that knocked out those tanks right at the beginning.
Is President Putin distinct in any way?
He's a very smart guy. He's a very cunning person. But I've dealt with some people I've dealt with some really bad people. But I will tell you, as far as this is concerned, you have to understand, he had no intention, in my opinion, of settling this war. I think he wanted the whole thing. When I got elected, we spoke, and I think we're going to have a deal. I can't guarantee that. You know, a deal is a deal. Lots of crazy things happen in deals, right? But I think we're going to have a deal. If I didn't get elected, I believe he would have just continued to go through Ukraine, and over a period of time, a lot of people would have been killed. Would have lasted for a period of time.
A lot of people have already been killed. We're talking about nearly 1 million people that have been wiped off the face of the earth. as a result of this war. It is a modern war in every sense of the word. It is drone warfare, tanks, planes, missiles, Orezhnik, for God's sake. These things are terrifying. It's a modern war. Europe and the US under Joe Biden made this argument that Putin wanted to take it all. He wanted to go through Ukraine. He wanted to go into Europe. He wanted to take it all. That was their framing. That was their argument. If we allow him to do this here, he is going to go through all of Europe. Now, this argument was always nonsense. Putin went into Ukraine with 150,000 people. That 150,000 people was enough to take territory. It was not enough to hold territory and to continue, which is the reason why Russia eventually pulled back in order to get their forces up to snuff in order to press and continue where they were going. It is a Western framing that Putin wanted it all. Initially, before the war started, and you got the William Burns memo, it was clear that Russia did not want to get involved into a conflict. Wars are always challenging to the state. Even though it's the fullest expression of power of the state, it's still challenging to the state, especially if the war goes poorly. There's no way for you to completely predict that. There's no way to predict what NATO was going to do. There's no way to predict whether or not the US was going to take a particular action that would have driven this country or all the world into a hellscape. And so those things are unpredictable in a way that you don't necessarily want to get involved in unless you need to get involved in. This was taking place on their border. It was the expansion of NATO. NATO is a hostile military organization. We're talking about us overthrowing the government of Iraq. We're talking about going into Yugoslavia, meaning this is not like the countries that are involved are just dandelions standing there. They have an active history of overthrowing governments. And so if you're Russia and you're seeing this on your border, you will take issue. I'm trying to point out, though, that Trump has started to use a Western framing in an argument to end it as a face-saving mechanism. So as opposed to the reality of it, of this take place on their border, this was a red line, Russia got involved in order to say no. They didn't want it all. They weren't even involved, interested in going into Ukraine in the first place. They were provoked in doing so. Meaning, if you've noticed, they've removed the language of unprovoked war of aggression. And even in the UN resolutions, they've been more neutral in the way that they've talked about the conflict, saying it's complicated. All right, fair enough. If the West decided that Putin wanted to take all of Ukraine, whether Trump believes it or not is irrelevant. It is brilliant when people say, what are you going to get out of this, Trump? Because oftentimes, as you've heard the media ask them, what is Putin going to have to give? What is Putin going to have to give? What does Putin have to give in order to make this work? The reason why they say that is because they know that Trump is going to need something to hold on to say, this is what I got. We negotiated. The war's over with. And this is what I got out of it from Russia. These are the concessions that I got out of it from Russia in order to end the conflict. Okay, well, if you're saying that one of your main concessions is that Putin wanted to take all of Ukraine, and that because I, Donald Trump, am in office, and I, Donald Trump, pushed for a deal, and Putin wouldn't dare cross me because I am Donald Trump, and this is the deal I was able to get, and that deal is all of Ukraine is not going to be taken. That is effectively a fart in a jar. That's what it is. It's a fart in a jar. Because the Russian position was not to take all of Ukraine. And because the Russian position was not to take all of Ukraine, Trump could live in the space of, well, this is what they wanted. Well, under this guise, Putin didn't give anything in real terms because that wasn't his objective in the first place. And because he didn't have to give anything and that wasn't his objective, that doesn't stop Trump from still selling it as if it was his objective, and that what he got out of it was to prevent all of Ukraine from being taken. It is brilliant politics in the way that it's being used, whether Trump knows it and believes it, or whether he's using it as a political face-saving mechanism. It's fascinating. And it works. It works because that was Europe's argument. That was America's argument. Trump is just folding himself within the context of that argument. Whether Europe believes it or not, doesn't matter. That is what he can hold on to and say, this is what I got. Because that is the argument that had been made to the American public and to the European publics for the last 3 years. It's fascinating. I want to go to my next guest. We are joined with the one and only Daniel Lazar. Daniel Lazar, if I can pull up the information, my computer is freezing at this moment. There we are. Daniel Lazar is an independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, politics, government, and social policy in general. Daniel, man, it's been a while since I've spoken to you. How you doing? You doing all right?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing good. It's glad to. I always enjoy these conversations with you. So I really appreciate you joining me. I have to get to Karlin Gorbachev. So JD Vance went to Europe at the Munich Security Conference and gave them a tongue lashing. He effectively talked to them like they were children and pointed out your liberal values are flailing. Like you call yourself liberal democracies, and yet you would go after the press and you would even go after elections, such as the election in Romania. He explicitly pointed out the election in Romania, where they canceled or annulled the second phase of the election for quote unquote TikTok videos that were supposedly coming from the Russians that they end up found came from one of the other liberal organizations in Romania itself. Apparently, there were going to be new elections, but they knew that if that election was held in the way that election was supposed to be held, Gorbachev would have most likely won. Gorbachev was a critic of NATO expansion. There were doubts, or there were even questions of whether or not he was going to try to pull Romania out of NATO because he didn't necessarily want the U.S. military base in Romania. So the belief is that Europe itself was pressuring, let's say, the organs in Romania to cancel those elections. Fast forward to yesterday. Gorbachev was apparently supposed to be going to Foul to run again in the election. This happens. He gets arrested. They can say detained, arrested. You can't go. You're not allowed to leave. He gets pushed against the wall. I don't know what all that is. He gets pushed against the wall. He gets arrested. Apparently, the offices get raided. People in his political party or political faction apparently also gets harassed. And Vance, if I'm not mistaken, it was Vance or Elon Musk, I believe, mentioned this again, saying this is outrageous. They're right. This is outrageous. How the hell are you doing this to this guy? Everybody and their mama knows at this point that he most likely would win in that election if the election was held. What is taking place in Romania right now? I am astonished by this, that this is taking place in Europe, and that everywhere else in Europe is perfectly okay with it taking place, because I haven't heard anyone else say anything about the fact that they're doing this to one of the political candidates running for president. Give me your take on this. What is going on? Give us a breakdown of what is happening in Romania around this issue and how they're able to get away with this.
Okay, it sounds good. I mean, first of all, let me begin by saying that Vance is not one to talk about violations of democracy. I mean, what we're seeing here in the U.S. is extraordinary. We have a virtual one-man dictator in the form of Elon Musk, lording it over a presidential cabinet meeting. We have extraordinary levels of corruption shooting through the roof. I mean, et cetera, et cetera. Every American knows what's going on now.
You have my agreement on that. Yeah, you have my agreement on that.
At the same time, Vance is not incorrect about what's going on in Romania.
Yeah.
I mean, electing a candidate, arresting a candidate or placing him under judicial control, which apparently is the phrase the Romanians are using, is extraordinary, and especially on the basis of what seems to be completely flimsy information about Russian interference. And of course, arresting him, first of all, postponing an election, of course, which happened last year, is even worse. Can you imagine what would have happened if the Supreme Court of the U.S., on the basis of some kind of vague FBI report, had canceled the presidential election last November?
Over TikTok videos.
The uproar would have been deafening. And Americans would have quickly charged the Supreme Court with usurping the role of the elected branches and would have immediately said that democracy was under assault. And so I think that, what goes for the U.S. goes for Romania. These kinds of interventions on the basis of really vague, the vaguest kinds of evidence is undemocratic. It's a kind of a coup d'etat. Now, I think that what's happening is that Georgescu is an ultra-rightist who is firmly allied with Trump, Musk, and Vance.
Right.
He is a right-wing conspiratorialist. He is friendly to, he's sympathetic to Putin and Russia. That's his right. Some of us have a certain degree of sympathy with Russia's plight, and I think it's an entirely legitimate point of view. But there is a war going on. Romania borders on the Ukraine. There's a spillover from the war. The war is going very badly from NATO's point of view. And so therefore, the NATO is very nervous about signs of dissent bubbling up. And certainly Georgescu represents one of those, he's one of those signs. So they're clamping down. They're trying to nip this in the bud. But the problem is it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. We saw what happened with Lawfare here in the U.S., where the Democrats filed all kinds of cases against Trump. Some were pretty valid. Some were highly valid, such as the January 6th charges. Others were nonsense, such as the
New York
hush money to Stormy Daniels, or the fact that he exaggerated the dimensions of an apartment he was trying to sell. And those were sheer nonsense. But the effect was to generate sympathy for Trump as a victim of the deep state, to make it seem that the Democrats were unscrupulously manipulating the legal system. And that's what's going to happen in Romania. I mean, it's like, this guy Georgescu was like, please don't throw me in the briar patch. And by throwing in the briar patch, they're benefiting him. So they're trying to contain anti-war dissent, but it's hopeless.
What are they using to go after him this time around? I know the first time they were saying TikTok videos, the Russians were putting out TikTok. Like, when I saw that, I was like, okay, this is absurd. I saw it happen in the US where they were trying to say Trump was working with Russia. They had nothing to go with it. They tried to say that there were Facebook and Twitter ads equaling, I think, like $50,000, half of which took place after the election. And you had stuff like buffed Jesus Christ. Like they were all over the place. They were an internet research agency that was effectively trying to maximize profit using the election to do so. And so when I was like, okay, this is absurd. And come to find out, it was absurd. And yet they cancel an entire election. That's astonishing.
Yeah, this is astonishing.
And now they're arresting the guy. What are they using to arrest him on now? This seems absurd to me.
I don't know. In fact, the New York Times article today says that the evidence so far is very vague and difficult to pin down. So I have no idea what evidence they have. But it's possible. Maybe some Russian oligarch is buying ads for him. I don't know. It's possible. It's funny. Some of his strongest support has come from the Israeli government. The Israeli government, yes, the Israeli government, the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, whose name is Chiklis, I believe, actually issued a statement in support of Georgescu. And this is despite the fact that Georgescu has taken classic anti-Semitic positions. But no one is speaking out about Israeli interference. And the reason is obvious: is that the NATO sides with Israel. And so therefore that's okay. So,
by the way, I pointed that out with Trump too. Like, they would say, well, Trump was working with the Russians, because Trump in one of his statements was like, well, I provided javelins. And as I was pointing out, Donald Trump was under a massive amount of pressure the first time around because everybody kept saying he's working with the Russians, he's working with the Russians, Russians got to be elected. And it's like Donald Trump got $100 million from Miriam Adelson. Nobody said he's working with the Israelis. Like, meaning the media takes no issue with them getting like 10, I think it ended up being like $50 million. Take zero issue with that.
It's utterly hypocritical, and of course there's also the fact that the U. I mean, how many elections does the U.S. foreign elections does the U.S. interfere in? I mean, how about dozens and dozens and dozens over the course of the entire post-war period? The U.S. is engaged in the most outrageous, blatant interference, subversion, etc. Of other countries, and of course, somehow America is innocent and only Russia is guilty. It's astonishing, but so these charges on their face, so there's every reason for skepticism, but there's every reason to believe that what we're seeing here is an attempt to bottle up forces that Georgescu and others represent. Now, and let me put it on the far right parties in Europe are coming on strong.
Yes, they are.
The AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, doubled its vote in the last election. They're now at 20%. Marine Le Pen is coming on strong in France. Maloney is already in power in Italy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they're worried about this far right force. But what they're really worried about is this far right dissent on the war, because the war is going really, really badly.
Explain something to me. I remember. So I covered the European parliamentary elections, and the things that they say in Europe, liberals, are very similar to the things that Democrats say in the U.S. And I remember telling my ex-girlfriend at the time, who was helping me, because I didn't speak the language, we were covering it in Austria, and the far-right parties took it. In fact, the far-right parties are in lead now. The other parties are trying to find a way in order to kind of keep the far-right out of leadership in Austria. And she told me one day, she said, the far-right party, I forget the name of it.
The Freedom Party
10 minutes,
in Austria.
Yeah, in Austria, right.
Yeah.
She said they spent 10 minutes talking about the Muslims were coming after Schnitzel. And she said, these people are idiots. Can't believe these people are getting elected. And as I pointed to her, yeah, that guy might spend 10 minutes talking about Schnitzel, but the guy also may turn around and say, why are we, we should be doing what's in the best interest of Austria. Or in Germany's case, we should be doing what's in the best interest of Germany. Why are we spending all of this money on the war? And I was trying to point out to her, people would accept the stupid 10 minutes of Muslims coming after Schnitzel if you were also talking about, hey, we should be looking out for the best interests of this country, and we don't believe that either NATO, the European powers, the European Parliament are doing that. Go into that for me. How are liberals completely missing this? Like, even in the U.S., when we're talking about the war, they are for the war. It's astonishing. How are they, like, in this bubble where they don't see why the tide is turning? Because they don't understand it. Like, from their point of view, they don't get it.
Well, there are a lot of things going on. First of all, there is a very powerful xenophobic wave that is building up against mass immigration. Now, I'm not convinced that the majority of the population sides with this. I think that in America, especially in America as a country, which has been built on immigration, I think that there's still a great deal of sympathy for the plight of these people. Great deal of sympathy. I think that polls show that while there is public support for the expulsion of immigrants who engage in violent crime, there's much lower levels, very low levels of support for the expulsion of immigrants who are otherwise, lead or law-abiding.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. I think that's fantastic because I feel tremendous sympathy. These people, anyone who makes it through the Darien Gap, was it 100 miles of dense jungle in an attempt to better their lives and better the lives of their children, has all my sympathy, and that's what this country was based on.
Agreed.
Not your ancestors who were brought here against their will, but my ancestors were brought, came voluntarily looking for a better life. And I see nothing wrong with that. But however, Trump is pushing a very aggressive anti-immigrant line, and that is unquestionably the far right is doing the same thing in Europe, and that must be opposed, because it just opens the door to bigotry against all all minorities, all racial minorities, all ethnic minorities, etc. But you're right. I mean, these countries are not pursuing their national interests. They're pursuing NATO interests, which, as Trump has demonstrated, are actually contrary to national interests. I mean, look, Joe Biden blew up Nord Stream. Everybody knows that. Now, is it in Germany's interest to be cut off from a source of low-cost energy? That has been devastating to German industry. But yet there's a conspiracy of silence. No one in the German government is willing to point a finger where it should be pointed, which is at the U.S. And so they float ridiculous stories about 5 Ukrainians on a rented yacht, and maybe they did it. And so no one is willing to stand up for democratic interests against this NATO steamroller. And so, unfortunately, with the total eclipse of the left, this dissent is taking a right-wing form. So therefore, nationalism is on the upsurge, and it's only the ultra-rightists like Georgescu who are speaking out against the war, speaking out against NATO, speaking out against NATO's insane plans to construct a giant naval base in Romania, which will put it in direct conflict with Russia. Why does Romania need this? This is complete nonsense. And there's no debate, however, it's just being pushed through. And that is, I think, really extraordinary and undemocratic.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it, especially not in Europe. And like you said, this kind of cone of silence where they watch and don't say anything. And then they would go lecture other countries about values and democracy and all of this other stuff. Give me your take on the way European leaders are dealing with Trump and this kind of new norm that he's trying to bring into the international geopolitical stage.
Yeah, there's no doubt that Trump has tossed a live hand grenade into a crowded room. There's just no doubt about that. I mean, the first NATO General Secretary, a Brit named Lord Eastmay, he made a very famous comment that the purpose of NATO was to keep the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in.
Right.
So essentially, America was brought in to guarantee the peace and was essentially given veto power over NATO. So all of Europe entered into a semi-colonial relationship with the United States, where the U.S. was the new lord and protector. But now, that worked throughout the Cold War period. Europe prospered during the golden age of 1948 to 73 or thereabouts. Living standards exploded, welfare rose, etc. Under this U.S. partnership. But now Trump is pulling the rug out from under it because he is adopting a stance of outright enmity, and he is essentially, the NATO is at war with Russia. Now Trump is backing Russia against NATO, and the Europeans are gobsmacked. They have no idea what to do. They essentially have got to declare independence from their former lord and protector, and they're not ready to do that. They're in no position to do that, but somehow they are being forced to do that.
Fascinating. I've never seen anything like this. And this, I guess, could be the last question. I find myself in a bit of a tailspin. Like for 3 years, and even before that, if you can go to Obama, you go to Joe Biden, you go to Donald Trump's previous presidency, there was a pressure campaign against Russia, especially around the issue of Ukraine. And now all of a sudden, Trump is like, all right, we're done. We're pulling out. We're going to get a peace deal. We're going to have a larger deal. We're done. Do you think this is going to last? And I guess this could be the last question. Like, and, you know, under normal circumstances, whatever the previous president did, the future president just kind of continues almost, you know, brain dead. So you get Clinton, you get Obama, you get Trump, you get Biden, and all of them, for the most part, had a similar foreign policy. It wasn't that much deviation. Now you get a radical deviation on some level. Is this a blip? Or do you think, no, this seems to be the fastest thing moving in regards to the Republican Party? And regardless of whether these people are neocons or not, they're going to recognize that this is where the public is on this issue because the public voted for Trump. This was litigated in the election. Trump won the election. I would argue part of that win was on this issue of foreign policy. Is this a new orthodoxy going forward? Or do you think this is a blip? The moment that a new president comes in, they're going to go back to this kind of normal American policy of force and beefing up the military and everything else. I mean, for God's sake, Trump is talking about cutting the military by 40%. Well, he said 50% if Russia and China goes in line. But even without Russia and China, he's still talking about like 40% cut. That is unheard of. Do you think this is going to be a norm going forward?
It's a very good question. I think that first of all, there is no doubt that the U.S. military record has been abysmal since over the last 30 years. I mean,
Yes.
it has managed to stumble into one military disaster after another. The Afghanistan, Iraq, and now the Ukraine. It's a losing war, and of course the Middle East, which this is the war without end. But the Ukraine was an astonishing blunder. The U.S. backed these neo-Nazi forces in 2014, and then and then when the country broke in two under the impact of the 2014 coup d'état, the U.S. sided with the ultranationalists in declaring war on the Russian-speaking population in the eastern countries. So the U.S. just blundered needlessly into a huge conflict and then succeeded in blowing it up into an outright war. And this is just, it is such a colossal miscalculation, and it just is the Democrats at their very worst. I mean, just these neocons are insane, they're stupid, they are reckless, and they are self-defeating. So I don't think there's any return to that kind of neocon blundering about. I think that's kind of been, that's kind of dead now. But I think that what's going to happen is that Europe is going to explode under the impact of this war. And I think that's
what does that mean?
In Romania. Well, that's what we're seeing in Romania. I mean, Romania's politics are destabilizing due to the war. And I think that that the whole Eastern Europe, from the Baltics down to Poland, down to the Black Sea, the whole intermarium, as it's called, between the Baltic and the Black Sea, this is going to shift to a war footing over against Russia. Number one. Number two, if Trump rams through his peace plan, you're going to see thousands of battle-hardened neo-Nazi fighters who will be embittered and angry because they have laid down their lives and seen their comrades killed or crippled for what turns out to be a lost cause. they will turn their anger on Zelensky. And meanwhile, thousands of these people will become a huge force on the European ultra-right. So do you want, do you want thousands of battle-hardened Azov battalion neo-Nazis, making common cause with ultra-rightists in France, Germany, Scandinavia, Italy? I mean, this is a recipe for disaster. It's very similar in certain respects to what we saw after World War I. And so the Ukraine is not going to go gentle into that midnight.
Right.
There's going to be huge repercussions, which will lead to further destabilization, further political disorder, and a growing strength on the radical right. So the incipient civil war we're seeing in Romania, I think, will spread to other countries.
Oh, that is grim. Daniel, man, thank you for this. Always appreciate your analysis. This is a mess. I always call it a catastrophe. And yeah, like you said, they're not going into that good night. Daniel Lazar is an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. Daniel, what are the books that people can get? You have seven.
I've written 3 books. They are the Frozen Republic, which was published in 1996, which is a critical dissection of the U.S. Constitution, which with all due modesty has been remarkably prescient about the breakdown we're seeing now.
Yeah.
Another book was called The Velvet Coup, about the 2001 election, so-called election of George W. Bush. And the third was America's Undeclared War, which deals with the urban breakdown. And you can order them all on Amazon, on Amazon.com. So please be my guest.
Very cool. And where can people find you? I just want to make sure I have here, they can find you on DH Lazar and on weeklyworker.co.uk.
No, I've moved on. I've got a website, a blog at daniellazar.com. I'm also writing for a website called Permanent Revolution, and also one called the Democratic Constitution blog.
Very cool. Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate this, man. Great analysis on this. Thank you very much. You have a good one. Be safe. All right. I see her. She is ready. She waited patiently as I finished with Daniel. Sarah Bills. She is a great. How you doing? You doing okay this morning?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. It's early. I know it's earlier for you, but my show is almost coming to an end. You will be my last interview. Last but not least, Sarah Bills, just so people know, she's an independent journalist, U.S. Navy veteran, and co-founder of DD Geopolitics. Definitely check them out. I see that stuff on Twitter all the time. It is fantastic analysis, and it keeps me up to date as just as news goes on over the course of the day. Thank you for joining me. I always appreciate you joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Give me you pay attention to geopolitics. It's in the name of the piece.
It's false advertising.
Yeah, I know, right? What is your take, just as a bare bones, and we can step into it further, of this kind of whiplash with Donald Trump taking over in the geopolitical? I've asked everybody who's come on who does geopolitical speaking and analysis, because I'm super curious on how other people are seeing this. You have some people who are far more cynical, and you have some people who are like far more hopeful. Like Scott Ritter is hopeful. He's over the moon. Like he is so bullish on this. And you get somebody like Mark Sloboda who's like, we need to see what happens. Yeah, it's total analyst. Give me your take on this. How do you see what Donald Trump is doing in regards to the moves that he's making? I mean, recently we had the UN Security Council resolution where the U.S. sided with Russia in their resolution. Europe abstained. Like just shocking stuff. You would never ever see something like that. Trump has gone after Zelensky as a dictator, saying he'd lose the election if that election was held. He has just is trying to get a framework for a mineral deal that I have defined as just a raping of Ukraine at this point. It's astonishing. And just to give a heads up, the government of Ukraine will contribute to the fund 50% of all revenues earned from the future monetization of all relevant government-owned natural resources assets, whether owned directly or indirectly by the Ukrainian government, defined as deposits of minerals, hydrocarbons, oil, natural gas, and other extractable materials, and other infrastructure related to natural resource assets. Basically, anything that comes out of the ground, we want 50% of it. So not only are you losing 20% of your territory, not only did you lose 500,000 or 600,000 people, it could be more, maybe a bit less. Not only were you pushed into this after the overthrow of the Ukrainian government, you now have to give money back to the US in the form of effectively anything that's coming out of the ground for the foreseeable future. That is astonishing. Like, this is a change that I've never seen before take place in American politics, where overnight the foreign policy radically shifted. They don't even use the term unprovoked war of aggression. They have gotten rid of that. They would say it's complicated. Give me your take on this. I've never seen anything like it.
It depends. Are you looking at it like an American, or are you looking at it like person on the outside? As an American, I'm really hopeful because it signals an isolationism that I think we need. I think we need a period of introspection. I think we need a period of self-care, if you will, of self-focus, a period of being actually self-centered and selfish. Not to say that we were altruistic and selfless before, but we pretend that we are. We need to actually be selfish and work on ourselves to be the best that we can be in this inevitably multipolar world. Even Marco Rubio acknowledged that the multipolar world is coming. It's been coming for 30 years. They've just delayed it as much as they can. So it's going to take a very introspective America to be able to function in this new world order, if you will. As a European, I'd be it's hard because it's going to suck for the foreseeable future. But in the end, this is maybe not in this way, maybe not this methodology, but this is the best thing for Europe. It gives them it makes them understand the need to diversify their sources of income, income, exports and imports. It forces them into a place where they have to re-examine and restructure what they're doing. And as a multipolarist, I find this to be extremely positive because it gets them off the dependency of the West and forces them to be creative. It's going to force them to stop being liberal. It's going to force them to stop feeding into this sort of Soros-esque New World, WEF, IMF, New World Order. So that's a good thing. It teaches them they have to be self-sufficient in other ways. The bad thing is that we design them to be dependent on us. Right. So we're forcing them to do something that they're not designed for without our assistance. So that's kind of scary. It's sort of leaving them out in the lurch. You know, yesterday Donald Trump said the EU was made to like rip off the United States, which is not the case. It was actually made to centralize power so the United States could better subjugate Europe. It's not.
I am glad you mentioned that because I have that clip pulled up where Trump said that because I wanted to get your take on that. Because he points out, as you point out, that it's almost as if, from his point of view, any group, any collaboration amongst countries that seem to or want to excel and grow, he considers it a threat. And so the fact that the EU came together and say, hey, we need to, there's China, there's Russia, there's America, there's all these big countries, we need to come together in order to have a better economic weight when dealing with these countries. I mean, EU, when they're dealing with countries, they're dealing with it as a group. That was part of the rationale behind it, that we have much more weight as opposed to being picked off individually by China or by Russia or by the US. I mean, if the US, let's say, for example, makes a deal with Germany and then makes another deal with Austria and then makes another deal with, okay, well, you have less economic weight in order to come to a better solution in that deal as individual nations, as opposed to dealing with the EU as a whole, which has a population that is just as equal to or bigger than the United States. And so it wasn't like they came together in order to screw over America. They came together because it was in their best interest to do so economically. Ideally, I know some people would disagree with that. Give me your take on that, though. He's clearly looking at it as they're doing this against us. And he is now threatening to put, I think, 25% sanctions on the EU for reasons that I still don't know why he's doing that.
I think they're imposed, but it's stupid because the Marshall Plan made them this way. That was our plan. So I'm not understanding this weird kind of, you're on your own. Well, they shouldn't really be on their own. It should be like, we got to get you kind of off of our teat. The thing about multipolarity is that the EU is not going to work in multipolarity anyway, because multipolarity is about celebrating the sovereignty of a nation, how they see it. So it's not going to work for the EU anyway, with kind of Germany dictating the EU foreign policy and economic policy. So I understand it, and it's a good thing. It does take away some of their bargaining power, but it gives them a plethora more of choices. And there's no veto power that Hungary is going to exercise over them or whatnots and what have you. So in the end, it's a good thing, but right now it's shocking, and it's the initial sort of shock is still kind of there because people thought they'll be with us forever.
Yeah. See, I think I slightly disagree with that. At least I think I do. Is it possible to have multipolarity in the context of the EU? So, like, for example, when I think of hegemony, I think of it in terms of Western hegemony. And I used to think of it in terms of, okay, well, they're going to be this kind of rubbing against, let's say, America and China as individuals. And I realized, okay, well, that's not really the case. Europe is lumping in with America as it deals with China, Russia, and everywhere else, basically 14% of the globe trying to control the rest of the globe. Then you get America saying, okay, we want out. We don't want to do this anymore. We're sick of this. Europe, you're on your own. Figure it out. Is it possible for Europe to be a part of this kind of multipolar world, but function as an EU collective? Almost like, because it seems that even though the European countries haven't necessarily agreed to it, that, Angela Merkel used to have to saying ever closer, that if you're pulling countries and treating them almost like states, almost like you have this kind of federal system that they're trying to create out of Europe. Under that model, that could be multipolarity in the sense that Europe functions as a single entity in its engagements with, let's say, China, Russia, the United States, or even Africa, or something to that effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in an economic block sense, yes. And it makes sense in an economic block and like from a negotiation standpoint for sure, but not from a nation building political choices. Like Germany shouldn't be making immigration choices for Hungary.
Yeah,
that is the antithetical to multipolarity because it's infracts on the sovereignty of Hungary. Of course, Germany wants to stay in the EU. It makes them the hegemon. They're the hegemon when the EU exists and is functioning well. Them and France. So of course they want to stay, but it has to. It's not working anyway. It's not functioning because of the veto power of states. And because of the unanimity clauses that are in there, it just doesn't function that well. But I do think that for economic negotiations on a scale that it would be supplied to the continent is definitely something that the EU should still be employed for. You send Slovakia to go negotiate, and you're going to wind up with a very bad deal in terms of the whole of Europe.
But see, you can agree. Like, I can agree to give up power. Like, meaning if I think I get something out of it as a country, I can make an agreement to say, okay, well, we're lumping ourselves together. And in the context of lumping ourselves together, there's certain, like if you and okay, that sounds bad because I'm a guy. What I was going to say, and I don't want it to be put poorly, even though it's going to come up poorly. If you and I were living together as roommates, we would have to make agreements on how things work to just not piss each other off. And the rent is cheaper, food is cheaper, all of those things are cheaper. We make agreements to give up some of our own individual liberties in order to make that work. And I'm saying that for any roommate, right? And I'm saying that is true for countries also, where these countries says, yes, we will give up our sovereignty to some degree because it is better in our either military or economic interests to do so. I guess it seems that Europe's plan, or the founders, realize this system doesn't work well. And the only way the system works well is if we become something similar to states. And so it seems that there's this kind of movement that might have stopped just because of the right-wing push that's taking place in Europe right now. But it seems like the original objective was, we're going to create an imperfect system. And the only way to correct that imperfect system is if these countries start functioning together as states, whether they want to or not, or whether they even know that that's the original plan of creating this kind of EU, this European Union. Does it make sense? I hope that makes sense. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass.
I just don't like it. I just don't.
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of saying, like, because it's going to be an unequal request anyway. It's going to be Slovakia. You're going to have to give up a lot more power, relatively speaking, than say France. And that's not. That's why the thing is kind of losing its balance, and it's sort of tipping out of, especially with you mentioned the right-wing populists, especially with them, because what the EU does, I don't want to say that it stifles sovereignty, even though it does in a way. It stifles uniqueness. It stifles the actual diversity of Europe, the actual traditional historical diversity of Europe. It stifles that, and their policies do the same too. It's kind of making Europe into, you said states, which is very interesting, because when people look at the United States, they're not looking at, oh, there's New Jerseyans and there's Kansans and there's Californians. Oh, do we want to look at the EU like that and just say they're all Europeans? I don't.
Yeah. I guess they would have to make that choice. And the reason why I say they would have to make that choice is because, fact of the matter is, they're dealing in a world with hard power realities in countries like Russia, China, and the United States. They're dealing with countries that are much larger, especially if you're talking about in the context of, let's say, the United States. If you're saying, okay, the United States making a deal with Austria, the United States making a deal with Britain, okay, those countries are going to get hosed in that deal. We have all the weight in the world. Look at what Donald Trump is doing to Canada. He's like, well, Canada only gives us, 4%. We have 25%. What are they going to do? Meaning he effectively has taken a position that he can muscle individual countries. And so if you're dealing with like Europe, do you really want to be Fortress Britain in a world with China with 1.5 billion people, India 1.5 billion people, the US, and having to make deals, either military, economic, or otherwise, where you are at a severe disadvantage? Like, I get the argument of this kind of individual sovereignty, but individual sovereignty also comes with weaknesses that may not necessarily be there if you lump yourselves in together. I don't think the United States would be better off if we were individual states trying to deal with Russia, China, etc. I hope that
I think we would be better off though if we were more in terms of a confederacy or a real federation where states had more power. I think that the scales get tipped in a way. Like here, the government has taken away too much of state power. That's what's kind of happening in the EU. The EU is determining immigration policy for places that they don't understand, like Italy. And like I said, Hungary. It's determining election things in Romania and Georgia. Like that's not where this needs to go. I think that's probably more along the ideas of that scaling back of the EU. It doesn't need to be involved in like civics and like culture. It should just be involved in the legality and the economic bloc. I mean, economic blocks are going to form, protectorate blocks are going to form. That's just the way that the world works.
Right.
But in terms of the structures of the EU, I think that it's gotten a little bit out of control.
No, I agree with you. Initially, it was only supposed to be a trading bloc.
Exactly.
And it just kind of evolved. Yeah.
Turned into a governing bloc. But I agree with with it staying how it was originally designed to be a trading bloc and an economic zone. It was to establish an economic zone, and it's gotten into this like behemoth that like writes laws, determines policy, fixes elections. It's way too big. So maybe just a scaling back to where it should have been. That's why I think that BRICS is constantly reiterating, like, we are just an economic bloc. That's it. We're not expanding past that. I think that that's important, and that's sort of what the EU should be looking at.
Russia and the United States are having dialogue today in Istanbul. There was an agreement that, they went from Riyadh, they're now Istanbul. These are apparently very basic talks, basically trying to reestablish the embassy,
Thank
Russia
God.
has,
It's so hard to
yeah.
travel to Russia. So please
See,
travel
I've never
to
been.
Russia,
I'm so
but
jealous of you. Yeah, I'm
we're
so
gonna
jealous of
take
you on that
you. We'll
front.
take you on one of our trips. But yeah, once I heard that, I was like, that's the thing I'm most happy about. I usually, like, last time I had to fly to Belgrade to get a visa. So this is great. We don't have consulate services really, except for New York, a small one in Houston, and then obviously Washington, D.C. So the
Yeah.
reestablishment of diplomatic relations is so important. Well, we
Do you
have
think
to.
it'll last?
No, well, I think that Russia needs to be hyper cautious. I'm dealing with a death in the family, so I haven't really paid tons of attention to the details.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. But what I think is going on, especially reading our media, is that there's a lot of exaggeration about the closeness of Russia and the United States, and this is just to drive a wedge between Russia and China. Did you notice that a week ago Trump said, let's scale back on our military
Yep.
spending? Somebody came out, our media came out and said, Putin agreed to this. He didn't agree to it. He just said, this sounds like a good idea. But as soon as that article came out that said Putin agreed, China came around and said, absolutely not. We will not be scaling down our military spending. In fact, we're doing the opposite. So that cued me to be like, what are these stories, these sort of narratives being created for? It's to pull Russia, or to give the sense that Russia is pulling away from the East. So I would take these stories with a large grain of salt and pay very close attention to what the parties actually say in talks. But I am excited about these talks because I'm excited to see how the new American administration interacts with real politicians. Russians are well-trained diplomats. They have schools for this. So I'm very curious to watch this sort of negotiating process, especially if Elon's involved. So this could get like really funny very quickly. Or, I mean, it could be, I don't know. So I am kind of excited, but I'm not excited for the same reasons. I was talking to Americans the other night, and obviously I'm American as well, but
yeah, that sounds. I was talking to Americans.
I'm kind of an outlier, but I don't really feel very American most of the time. But they have this weird notion that, like, as long as they go to a country and say Trump's in office now, they're going to be like, well, everything's different. Sit down. And I'm like, that's not how this works. Just because our internal mechanisms and our administration have changed. Sure, there are some countries that were understandably very excited for a Trump term. But for the most part, people are like, we don't forget what you did in the 40s, let alone what you did last term. What are you talking about? And stop approaching people with this, like, we're different now. It's been 2 months. Like, give it a little bit. Like, you got to do some stuff that proves that you're different now. And it's kind of, it's off-putting. It puts people... It puts people off because it was interesting. We were in a call with a lot of Europeans, and they were like, "Nothing is different. Why would we trust you right now? Look what you did in Minsk." And then they'll say, "But Trump wasn't a part of Minsk," and you're like, it's just a very odd idea. I think that the MAGA crew kind of has a bit of rose-colored glasses on, or they're just kind of riding this pink wave of honeymoon period.
I think it's wild to me because I remember having this conversation with Ritter, and I was like, "Dude, you're being way too bullish." Like he was so excited, and I remember my audience was completely the opposite. My audience was like, "Dude, I understand that Trump is in office; he wants to do something different." But we ignored the Minsk agreements. We blew off the Istanbul agreements. We blew off the JCPOA.
He's excited because he wants to go back to Russia. That's what he says.
Well, that might be it. That might be it.
Just put them friends again so I can start going back to Russia.
I guess I'm pointing out, like, you look at all of these agreements that the U.S. blew off, missile treaties, all of these things, even going back to like the 80s under Reagan and Gorbachev. And then it's like, okay, you have 1 month with Trump in office, and you believe that everything should be different. It's like my ex-wife, right? Where at a certain point, it's like we're clearly breaking up, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm okay. I can drop all of it, and I'm, it's like just because I drop all of it, and just because I could say, okay, all's forgiven, let's go back to some normality, doesn't mean she's there. And it's the same thing with this, right? All of these other countries saw you blow off agreements on a whim, and even weirdly enough, the fact that Trump was able to do this over the course of a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever, gets across how fickle policy is in this way. Meaning it's hard to trust it because A, it's happening so fast.
Exactly.
And B, you've shown a propensity where you've been willing to just get rid of the stuff on a whim.
Yep, the
Multiple
stuff you did
presidents.
last term, let alone a couple terms ago.
Yes.
You know? I feel like exactly what you said. It actually is eroding the trust instead of building trust. It's like, you mean to tell me that you could have just erased this the whole time and you were letting us suffer? For what? It was this easy? Come on. Like, especially for Russia, who was cut out of any dialogue whatsoever. With China, at least for them, they're like, we don't care. We don't want to talk to you anyway. But Russia, it's like they weren't even included. And now to come to them and be like, you know what? We're ready to sell you Coca-Cola. We're ready to recognize Donbass. We're ready to do this. And why would a Russian ever turn around and say, you know what? Let's sit down and let's do it. It should be the opposite. They should say, why would we do it now? If you could have done it this whole time, we've been trying to negotiate since the 90s.
Yeah. So if that's the case, and if Russia is taking that point of view, which I don't know how they couldn't, right? If China is taking that point of view, if the other countries around the world are just waiting for the shoe to drop, what do you think they're going to get out of these negotiations? I mean, obviously the negotiations are going to go beyond Ukraine. And it seems like they're talking about the Arctic. They're talking about resource exploitation, like meaning not just because many of the minerals that they're talking about, Putin brought up, hey, we also have rare earths that we'll negotiate. So that's going to be another plank in the negotiation. It sounds like they are, I could be wrong, but it sounds like they are talking about a radical deal between Russia and the United States that goes into security issues, that goes into economic issues, that goes into exploitation in regards to the Arctic, that goes into dealing with, let's say, military issues around the globe. This sounds like it is expansive, like severely, radically so. Do you see it this way?
Yeah, but once Russia Russia knows what they're doing. Again, they're like, MIGMO is a school for foreign policy and diplomacy. These kids are taught how to be politicians. Here, they learn it on the streets. That's why our politicians are
they learn it on the streets.
But these streets. But anyway, so I think that Russians understand. They're like, they don't have any clue what's coming. Wait until they sit down and they say, you're going to have to close your CIA operations in Western China. You're going to have to stop with this Turkic nonsensical NATO bullshit that's always on our doorstep. And once Donald Trump realizes how much stuff the United States is actually entangled in, he's probably going to back off because he's going to be like, oh. Because
so you don't think they're going to get the deal?
No, because
you think it's going to be
we've been subjugating Russia for so long through so many means that all of these programs to sit here and say Russia's going to want them all gone. Trump probably doesn't even know most of them exist. So this is a huge. You mentioned security for the Russia and the United States to enter into a security agreement. Huge things would have to change. Russia knows that, but I don't think Trump knows that. I don't think Trump understands just how involved we are in Central Asia and the Caucasus just because we want to bother Russia.
Yeah.
Like, it's very strange that he kind of doesn't, he's kind of disregarding almost 100 years of foreign policy to send like, I'm the cool guy. I'm here. I'm based. It's weird.
He is, but I think he's doing, I don't think he's doing so because he loves Russia. I think he's doing so because he's in a situation where he defines with $36 trillion in debt. And Joe Biden was packing on what, $2 trillion each year. I think Donald Trump put on $9 trillion when he was in office. We spent $10 trillion on the wars in the Middle East.
We're going to be fine.
Yeah. So just a radical amount of money, right?
Yeah.
And then you hear, wait a minute, we went from 70% reserve currency to 50% reserve currency. That trend line is problematic for us. If you're the reserve currency, obviously you're going to have to print more money because the rest of the world is also using the money. And so you're going to run massive deficits, but you're also allowed to benefit from those massive deficits that you're able to run in a way that the rest of the world can't. If you get Russia that starts pushing very hard on this issue of single currency, alternate currency to the dollar, we need to stop using the dollar. The dollar has been used as a weapon. And your name is Donald Trump. You're like, okay, that is radically detrimental to the way that the U.S. can operate going forward. You are effectively taking a knife to the throat of America if you get rid of the reserve currency, which is effectively what BRICS and Russia was doing, because they took them off the SWIFT. And they, as you pointed out, all of the sanctions, they were going after them as a weapon. So if you're Trump and you're like, this is a problem, we need to stop this. We need to unravel this. Meaning, I get the sense that the unraveling is coming from this place of self-preservation, as opposed to we're just doing it because we're doing it. And if it is indeed coming from this place of self-preservation, is he more inclined to do it? That's where I'm stuck with, right? Because I feel you. Like, if you think of all the sanctions that have been applied onto Russia, and then you think of Europe is going to complain, you think Zelensky is going to complain, you're going to get howls coming out of the US. I mean, you can see the headlines now. It's screaming, oh my God, he's abandoning Ukraine. What does it mean for Taiwan? Meaning they've already pivoted to the next war, to the next flashpoint. If it indeed, that's the way he's thinking about it, is he more inclined to do that and get rid of all of that stuff in the way that you articulated?
Maybe, but then that's even more scary to me, because that means that this empire really is in decline. This is really some contraction. If they're willing to make concessions like that in order to hold on to power or any semblance of power, that means we're getting into the desperation phase. Once we start these huge concessions, that's a good sign for Russia. It's positive for multipolarity, but that just shows that we are in a very serious decline, and empires in decline are irrational. So how long can we hold up these agreements? How long can we stay in them? Are they stable? These are all questions that Russia has to ask themselves, I guess, before they enter them. But the United States, for all intents and purposes, regardless of what Elon's doing or what Trump is doing, is in a contractual phase. The empire is big time contracting. They know it, and they're struggling and flailing to hold on to power. This is where the irrationality comes in, which is why they might be willing to take some of these deals that in the past they would be like, absolutely not America, never. But if they're willing to now, it's a good sign and it's a bad sign. That's why I'm optimistic as a multipolarist, but I'm also very cautious because it's going to suck. The labor and delivery is going to suck badly, mostly for Europe.
But isn't it rational that Trump is doing it? Like, meaning, if you're trying to hold on to empire, well, or willing to let,
I guess the ends are rational, but the means might not be. It's just something that these concessions aren't something that we would ever have made or thought of ourselves to make, especially after the Cold War when we declared victory. But now it's time to reevaluate. Did we really win? Did the world really win? Did democracy really win when we won the Cold War? Maybe not. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Trump's really trying to rectify that. I don't know. I'm just very cautious before I get optimistic. But I'm also not a black cloud at all. I'm not black pilled yet.
No, I feel you. It's like I'm a person, so I'm hopeful.
I mean, there's a lot of things happening that are like, this is gonna suck, but the ends almost justify the means. Like yesterday, Republika Srpska president declared independence. That means Bosnia is going to fall apart. Does this suck? Absolutely. Is it going to suck? Yes. Should Bosnia be held together as a federation? Probably not. So
wait. Go back. You lost. You said that very fast and you lost. I'm sorry.
Oh,
dig into the issue for me. Explain it to just so
just so you guys know, Bosnia is run by a triumvirate of 3 presidents, a Croat, a Bosniak, and a Serb. It's the most ridiculous thing. It's like they want an ethnic war. We set up that state through the Dayton Accords. So it's our state for all intents and purposes. The Serbs have 49%. The other 2 have 51%. Coincidence? No. Anyway, so yesterday the Serbian president was sentenced to a year in prison. He said, well, then forget it. If you're going to sentence me to a year in prison, then we're going to declare independence, which means the Serbian part wants to break off and go back to Serbia, which makes sense anyway. It shouldn't really be the way that it is, but it's going, well, like I said, it's going to suck. But should it be something? Yes, it's a necessary sucky time, I guess. But that's how I see all of this stuff. These things are going to suck. The Ukraine war did not have to suck this bad. It didn't have to go on this long. But those territories at the end of the day should have been Russian the whole time, Crimea and the Donbass. So these things are kind of going back and rectifying the things that were done after the world wars, this sort of breaking down of the Westphalian system of state sovereignty into these sort of weird enclaves that are, I don't know, everything that they did in the Balkans is strange, but these sorts of things that they created after the world wars are kind of slipping now. They're kind of
falling apart.
James.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's wild part to be alive, to put it mildly. Last question. What are you guys covering that is piquing your interest right now? I've been looking through your Twitter feed on some of the items that are there. And I think I asked this once before to one of my other guests, but you follow this up closely. What is the story that you think is underreported, that is important, that is significant, that you don't necessarily think is getting the coverage that it deserves because of how important it is, but the media or whatever else, for the most part, just is not seeing it?
The Romanian elections. I think that they're using it as a trinket of like a free speech. Look at Europe, how corrupt it is, sort of trinket, but it's much bigger than that. And I think because
what we're talking about, just so the audience would know, Karlin Gorbachev was arrested yesterday, and apparently they was going after members of his political party. The New York Times apparently was reporting it was vague in regards to their rationale for even doing it. The first time around, they annulled the election, saying that there were TikTok videos that the Russians apparently put out. Come to find out, it wasn't the Russians; it was one of the liberal parties that was in Romania. Give context to the audience on why you believe that story is bigger than what it seems.
I want people to, like, when we read these stories, I want people to try to visualize that they're not happening in Europe. They're happening in Latin America. Okay. And if this were the case in Latin America, we would be saying, look at this banana republic with all these Mexicans. But no, it's Romania, right? And they're quote unquote white. So it's like, and they're the EU. Oh, they're doing the right. Or we just don't report on it the same way, which is odd to me because, well, not odd. I guess this administration is using it as sort of a free speech thing, but it's not. It's actually a remnant and leftover from the Biden era that we need to understand needs to be kind of unraveled and kind of like detached from that region. And people don't realize like exactly what's going on. It was touched on a few times in some of the bigger accounts that did it, but people need to talk about why Romania is a cornerstone to the EU and NATO. It has the biggest NATO base under construction right now, just juxtaposed next to the largest Orthodox church being constructed right now. It's a very interesting dichotomy. So while the nation itself is going towards tradition, NATO is trying to pull this country into its orbit, and it's just it's failing. And then again, you see that desperation. You're arresting a president because he formed a fascist organization on TikTok. Like, we got to start, like, what are our priorities here? And this is a sign actually of the decline of the EU. They're a flailing empire at this moment as well.
Yeah, if you have to do that, something's wrong. Like that breaches all notion of liberal value.
He's on house arrest. They let the Tates go, but they put this guy on house arrest. Make it make sense.
Yeah, I showed the video earlier of him on crutches being arrested.
Yeah,
which is again mind-blowing. Like this is Europe. Like that was the part that got me. It's like, this is Europe. This is not supposed to happen in Europe. Sarah, always appreciate you. Thank you for this. Sarah Bills, she is an independent journalist, U.S. Navy veteran, and co-founder of DD Geopolitics. Sarah, is there anywhere else that people can find you? I want to make sure.
We're taking a little bit of hiatus. The crew was just in Lebanon at the funeral of Hassan Nasrallah, so they're still getting back and getting situated, but we're working on some stuff. We have a new show coming out. So just visit us at ddgeopolitics.com. You'll stay updated with everything, or our Twitter accounts for sure.
Okay. How was the funeral, by the way, for Nasrallah?
They said it was packed. Obviously, I couldn't go, but they had a really, really nice time. They said the people were amazing and that they really weren't worried at all, which is interesting. I would have been very scared at Hassan Nasrallah's funeral.
That could have
Israel flying overhead, but yeah.
Well, considering what happened in Iran, where they had that massive explosion at the funeral, I can imagine.
But they said it was amazing. Hospitality was like They said the hospitality was better than Dubai, which wow,
interesting. Sarah, thank you for this. You have a safe and beautiful evening.
You too.
Have a good one. Be safe.
Enjoy your weekend. Bye.
Thank you. All right. We have come to the end of the show. What is it? 1.4 million more mourners. Really? It was that many. It was that many. Wow. I mean, the man is an icon, right? And so they know there were going to be a lot of people going to that funeral. And apparently there were. Look, we've come to the end. Let me read the chats. All chats will be read, provided they're not racist, sexist, bigoted. So definitely feel free. Wraith 636. Peace and gratitude, Jamal Thomas, for what you do. I just do the news. That's all. It's just my job. I do appreciate it, though. Lori Ald. Thank you, Lori Ald. Leave a comment. I love it when you guys leave comments. Good show today. Good show. I want to thank all of them. Wilmer Leon, or Arno, Daniel Lazar, and Sarah Bills. I want to thank all of you for joining me. Shout out to you, Method. Shout out to you, OnlyJS. Shout out to you, Lori Ald. Shout out to Faye Lou. Shout out to Zoo. I think this is Zhao Loon. Diane Thomas, please push the like button. Mama Thomas, on point. Somebody asks, are you paid to do this? She's like, that's my child. What are you talking about? No. No, I'm just here for support. Look, I want to thank all of you for joining me. Hit the like button, share the content, share the video. If you dig it, you can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon. I strongly suspect this video is going to be monetized just from the title. Whatever. If you dig it, please support it. You guys effectively help pay for the content. These shows are often demonetized for the subject matter that we go with. So whatever is paid, much of it, most of it is coming from you, and I thank you for it. So I'm going to end this. Like, share, subscribe, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, memberships, all of those things. Buy me a cup of coffee in the way that people say. I'm going to end it. You all have a fantastic evening, and I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Who do I have tomorrow? Jeremy Kuzmarov is going to be here tomorrow. I'm going to have to book 7 and 8. You guys have a fantastic evening. I'll talk to you bright and early tomorrow morning. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 103. Signing off.